On the eve of their wedding, Boston Mafia boss Vincent Moretti is forced to fake his own death after a brutal betrayal by his younger brother to save the woman he loves. Believing she was abandoned, Amelia spends 5 years rebuilding her life alone, unaware that Vincent has been watching over her from the shadows. You are listening to a story exclusively narrated on the Mafia Romance channel. Relax and step into the world of love stories filled with mystery, emotions, and passion. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment to support us. The city of Boston wore its lights like jewelry that night, glittering along the harbour as if nothing terrible could ever happen beneath such a sky. Vincent Moretti stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse on the 40th floor, a glass of untouched scotch sweating in his hand, and watched the water breathe in the dark. Tomorrow he would marry Amelia Hart. The thought alone unclenched something in his chest that had been wound tight since the day his father died and left him the empire. The guns, the debts, the enemies, the crown of thorns disguised as a throne. Amelia had never asked for any of it. She'd wandered into his life 2 years ago in the most unremarkable way, spilling coffee on his shirt outside a bakery near Beacon Hill, apologizing in that breathless, mortified way of someone who had never once in her life intended harm to another human being. Vincent, who had killed men for less than a stained shirt, had laughed. He hadn't laughed like that in a decade. She did not know what he was, not really. She knew he was wealthy, that men called him Sir with a kind of fear dressed up as respect, that black cars idled outside restaurants when they dined. She had asked questions early on, and he had answered with half-truths smooth as river stones, and she had let herself believe them, because she loved him, and love, when it is young and hopeful, chooses not to look too closely at the shadows. Tonight, he intended to tell her everything. "You're doing the wedding rehearsal thing wrong," said a voice behind him. "Grooms are supposed to be drunk and terrified by now, not standing here like a museum statue." Vincent didn't turn. He knew the voice, had known it since it was a boy's voice, cracking and eager, following him around their father's estate in Providence like a shadow that adored him. Dante Moretti, 26 years old, his only brother, the only blood he had left in this world that he trusted. "I gave up terror a long time ago, Dante," Vincent said. "It stopped being useful." Dante crossed the room and poured himself a drink from the same decanter, dropping into the leather chair with the loose-limbed ease of a man who had never once carried the weight Vincent carried. "You love her that much? More than the family, more than the name." Vincent finally turned, and something in his dark eyes, usually so carefully locked, softened at the mere mention of her. "I would burn all of it down for 1 more year with her." Dante's jaw ticked, almost imperceptibly, but Vincent, trained since childhood to read the smallest twitch of a man's face across a boardroom table, caught it. He didn't understand it yet. He wouldn't understand it until it was too late. "That's dangerous talk for a boss," Dante said lightly, swirling his glass. "The Sabatini family would love to hear you say that. Weakness for a woman, historically fatal." "Let them hear it." Vincent set his glass down, untouched, and something like peace moved through him. False peace, the kind that exists only in the hour before the storm breaks the house apart. "Tomorrow I marry her, Dante, and after tomorrow I want out. I want to hand you the operations in the north, keep the legitimate businesses, disappear with Amelia somewhere the Moretti name means nothing. The silence that followed was not comfortable. "You'd give it all to me," Dante said slowly, and there was something strange in his voice now. Something Vincent, blinded by love and the particular exhaustion of a man who has spent 15 years holding a gun to the world's throat just to keep his family standing, did not catch. Every share, every warehouse, every favour owed to this family, I'd sign it to you tonight, if the lawyers weren't asleep. Vincent smiled, a rare, unguarded thing. "You've earned it. You've been loyal since you were 12 years old, and Papa put a knife in your hand and told you to stop crying." Dante looked at his brother for a long moment, and there was something in his face that might have been love, and might have been grief for a decision already made, a debt already owed to men far more dangerous than a Moretti could ever hope to survive owing. "I have to go," Dante said abruptly, standing, setting his glass down half full. "Early morning, best man duties. Don't want the ring-bearer showing up drunk." "Dante." His brother paused at the door. "Thank you," Vincent said, "for everything. I mean it." Dante did not turn around. "Good night, Vincent." The door closed with a soft, final click, and Vincent Moretti, who had survived 3 assassination attempts, 2 federal investigations, and a war with the Kozlov family that had left 11 men dead in a single Tuesday, stood alone in his penthouse and felt, for the first time in years, entirely and catastrophically safe. He did not know that in exactly 6 hours, that safety would be the thing that killed him. He picked up his phone and called Amelia. She answered on the second ring, her voice thick with sleep and happiness. "Vincent," she murmured, "you're supposed to be asleep. Bad luck, seeing the groom before the wedding." "I'm not seeing you," he said. "I'm hearing you. That's different." She laughed, soft and warm, a sound that had become, over 2 years, the only true north he trusted in a life built entirely on lies. "Tomorrow," she said. "I'll be Mrs. Moretti tomorrow." "Tomorrow," he agreed, and something in his chest ached with a joy so large it frightened him, the way all things too good to be true frighten men who have spent their lives waiting for the other blade to fall. "I love you, Amelia. Whatever happens, whatever you ever hear about me, I need you to know that first, before anything else." There was a pause on the line, faint confusion in it. "Vincent, you're scaring me a little. What would I hear?" "Nothing," he said, too quickly, hating himself for it. "I'm just a sentimental groom. Go to sleep, Tesoro. Dream of white dresses." "I love you too," she whispered. "Good night, my Vincent." He hung up the phone and stood at the window a while longer, watching the harbour lights, unaware that 4 floors below, in the parking garage of his own building, his brother was meeting with 2 men in a black sedan bearing no plates, men who worked for Alexei Sabatini, the head of the only crime family in Boston with the resources and the hatred necessary to end the Moretti reign in a single night. Unaware that Dante Moretti, drowning in gambling debts he'd hidden from his brother for 3 years, debts owed to the very family that wanted Vincent dead, had made a choice 6 weeks earlier that could not be unmade. Unaware that tomorrow's wedding would never happen, that in 6 hours gunfire would tear through the sanctity of everything he loved, and the only way to save the woman sleeping peacefully 4 miles away, dreaming of a white dress and a groom who adored her, would be to make her believe, for the rest of her life, that he was dead. At 3:47 a.m., Vincent woke to the sound his body had been trained since boyhood to recognize even through the deepest sleep, the particular click of a silenced weapon's safety disengaging. He rolled off the bed a half-second before the first bullet tore through his pillow. Years of discipline, moving his body faster than conscious thought. 2 men in black tactical gear stood in his bedroom doorway, and behind them, in the hallway light, a third figure Vincent recognized with a violence that struck harder than any bullet. Dante. His brother stood there, with a gun in his own hand, not raised, not lowered, his face bone-white and slick with sweat, looking at Vincent on the floor with an expression of such raw devastation that for one absurd, suspended moment, Vincent thought Dante had come to save him. "I'm sorry," Dante said, and his voice broke on the words. "Vincent, I'm sorry. I didn't have a choice. They had Mama's grave. They said they'd desecrate it. They said—" "Shoot him!" one of the gunmen snapped, and the moment shattered. Vincent moved. 15 years of war had built into his muscles an instinct no betrayal could override. He seized the lamp from the nightstand and hurled it, buying himself the half-second he needed to reach the drawer where he kept the pistol Amelia had begged him, half-joking, not to keep in the bedroom. His fingers closed around it as the first true volley of gunfire chewed through the mattress where he'd been lying seconds before. He fired twice. Both gunmen dropped. Dante stood frozen in the doorway, his own weapon still lowered, tears running openly down his face, and Vincent, God help him, could not raise his gun at his brother, even now, even with the smell of gunpowder thick in the air and 2 dead men bleeding into his bedroom carpet. "Why?" Vincent said. It wasn't a question so much as a wound given voice. "Sabatini owns me," Dante whispered. "I owe him $4 million, Vincent. $4 million. I've been paying interest with information for 3 years. I never thought it would come to this. I swear to you, I never thought they'd ask me to." Sirens, distant but approaching. Someone had heard the shots. Someone had called it in. "There are more of them," Dante said, wiping his face with a shaking hand, some last shred of loyalty fighting through the wreckage of what he'd done. "Downstairs, in the lobby. They're not going to stop with 2 men, Vincent. They came for you tonight, and they will come again tomorrow, and the next day, and they'll come for Amelia too if you're seen alive walking out of this building. Sabatini doesn't leave loose ends. He'll kill her just to make sure you understand what losing feels like." Vincent's blood went cold in a way no gunfire had managed. "Amelia." "There's a way out," Dante said, desperate now, pathetic and terrified, and still, despite everything, Vincent's brother. "The old tunnel from Papa's time, under the building. If they don't find a body, they'll assume you escaped and come after you directly. But if there's a body, if they think you're dead, you want me to fake my own death." Vincent's voice was very flat. "I want you to live," Dante said. "I'll tell them I did it. I'll tell Sabatini I finished the job myself, that you're dead, that the family is mine now, and the debt is cleared. He'll believe me. I'm your blood. Who else would he trust to confirm it? But Amelia can't know. If she knows, if she so much as looks like she's grieving something other than a real death, Sabatini has people watching. He'll know you're alive within a week, and then everyone you love is dead within a month. You have to let her believe it, all of it. You have to let her hate you if that's what it takes to keep her breathing. Vincent looked at the two dead men on his floor, looked at his brother, sobbing now, gun still slack in his hand, a boy again suddenly, 12 years old, with a knife he didn't want to hold. Looked toward the window, toward the direction of Amelia's apartment 4 miles away, where she slept in white sheets, dreaming of a wedding that would now never come. Every instinct in him screamed to go to her, to wake her, to tell her everything, and put a gun in her hand and stand between her and the entire Sabatini organization, if it came to that. But he had built his life on knowing the difference between what he wanted and what would keep the people he loved alive. And the arithmetic here, however monstrous, was simple. If he went to her tonight, she died within the month. If he disappeared, truly disappeared, let the world believe Vincent Moretti bled out on his own bedroom floor, she lived. She grieved. She hated him, perhaps, for a silence she would never understand. But she lived. "Get me to the tunnel," Vincent said, and something in his chest, some final, tender piece of the man he had almost gotten to be, closed like a fist. "Take one of their identification badges, leave it near the door, make it look like a struggle. And Dante." His brother looked up, hope and horror mingled on his face. "If you ever tell her the truth without my permission, if you ever put her in a single ounce more danger than tonight already has, I will kill you myself, blood or not. Do you understand me?" "I understand," Dante whispered. 20 minutes later, staged blood pooled from a corpse dressed in Vincent's own clothes, his wedding ring left deliberately on the nightstand as though torn off in a struggle. Vincent Moretti descended into a tunnel his father had built 40 years earlier for exactly this kind of night, and walked out into the black Boston morning, a dead man. Above him, unheard, his phone began to ring. Amelia, waking early with wedding day nerves, calling to hear his voice one more time before the sun came up on what should have been the best day of her life. He did not answer. He would not hear that ringing again, not her real voice, not her laughter, not the particular way she said his name like a prayer, for 5 long years. Amelia Hart stood in her wedding dress in the back room of St. Agnes Cathedral, watching the second hand on the wall clock crawl past 9, then 9:30, then 10, and felt something inside her chest begin, very quietly, to die. "He'll be here," her sister Claire said for the 4th time, though her voice had lost its conviction somewhere around the 2nd hour. "Vincent loves you. Something's happened, that's all. Traffic, or he's dead in a ditch, or he's run off with someone else, or he never intended to marry me at all," Amelia said, her voice strangely calm, the calm of a woman standing at the edge of a cliff who has not yet looked down. Those seem to be the only 2 options anyone's willing to say out loud. By noon, the police had been called, not by Amelia, who could not bring herself to dial the number, but by Claire, frantic, certain something had gone terribly wrong. By 4 in the afternoon, detectives stood in the ruin of Vincent Moretti's penthouse, and Amelia sat in a hard plastic chair at the precinct in her wedding dress, still wearing it, unable to bring herself to change out of the only thing that still connected her to the morning when she had believed, with her whole foolish heart, that she was about to become someone's wife. A detective with kind, tired eyes crouched in front of her. "Miss Hart, I need to tell you something, and I need you to understand it's preliminary. We don't have full confirmation yet, but there was a body found in Mr. Moretti's residence. Signs of a struggle. We believe he's dead, Amelia said, before the man could finish, because some part of her had known it the moment she heard his silence on the phone that morning. Some animal instinct that recognizes catastrophe before the mind can name it. We believe so, yes. I'm very sorry. She did not cry in that plastic chair. She would think, later, that this was the strangest part of the whole nightmare, that grief that large did not announce itself with tears, but with a kind of total, hollow silence, as though her body had simply stopped being able to process input, like a switchboard overloaded into darkness. The funeral, 3 weeks later, was closed casket, which the family lawyer, a grim, courteous man named Salvatore, who had represented 3 generations of Morettis, explained was standard given the condition of the remains, a phrase that made Amelia physically ill every time she thought of it in the months that followed. Dante Moretti stood beside her at the graveside, his face grey and hollow, and she remembered thinking, even through her own devastation, that grief had aged him a decade in 3 weeks. She had no way of knowing that his hollowness was not grief at all, but guilt, a guilt so total it would eventually calcify into the only kind of penance a man like Dante Moretti knew how to offer: silence and distance, and letting his brother's fiancée believe a lie that was slowly, quietly, killing something in her too. 2 months after the funeral, alone in the apartment she had once imagined filling with Vincent's children, Amelia Hart discovered she was pregnant. She told no one for the first 6 weeks, except Claire, who held her while she cried the tears she had not been able to cry at the funeral, at the police station, in any of the terrible grey weeks of that autumn. She told herself, in the sleepless nights that followed, that she should feel joy, a piece of Vincent growing inside her, a reason to keep breathing when breathing itself had come to feel like an optional activity she was too tired to continue. But joy, when it came at all, arrived tangled with a grief so ferocious it frightened her, because the child growing inside her would never know its father's voice, never know the particular way Vincent laughed with his whole chest, never know that his eyes went soft and unguarded only for her, only ever for her. She would raise this child alone in a city that Vincent Moretti had once, unknown to her, ruled from its shadows. And she would do it without a single word of explanation for why the man who loved her enough to propose on a rooftop covered in fairy lights had somehow also managed to die in a way the police, 6 months later, still could not fully explain. Because that was the detail that never let her rest in the years that followed. The case never closed, no arrests were made, the signs of struggle detectives had mentioned that first terrible day were never elaborated upon in any report she could obtain. And Salvatore, the family lawyer, grew increasingly evasive whenever she pressed, until eventually he stopped returning her calls altogether, and the Moretti name, and everything attached to it, closed around her like a door swinging shut on a room she was never meant to have entered. Her son was born on a bitter February morning, red-faced and furious at the cold world he'd been delivered into. And when the nurse placed him on her chest, Amelia looked down into a face that was, impossibly, achingly, already beginning to hold the shape of his father's jaw, the particular dark intensity that would one day be his father's eyes. Leo, she whispered, the name she and Vincent had chosen together on a lazy Sunday morning 8 months before he died, half as a joke, half in earnest, both of them laughing about baby names before either had proposed. Leo Moretti Hart. She would raise him alone. She would tell him, when he was old enough to ask, that his father had loved him very much and had died before he was born. And that would have to be enough, because it was the only truth she herself possessed. She did not know, could not have known, not in 1,000 years of imagining, that 4 miles away, in a hospital under a name that was not his own, a man was standing at a window overlooking the very same city, having paid a nurse an enormous, dangerous sum of money to confirm, quietly, that Amelia Hart had given birth to a healthy son. Vincent Moretti pressed his palm flat against the cold glass and wept for the first time since the night he died. Silent, racking sobs that shook a body trained never to show weakness, because somewhere in this city was a son he could never hold, and a woman he could never touch, and a truth he could never tell, not without signing both their death warrants in the same breath. He did not go to her. He would not go to her, not for 5 long years. But from that night forward, some silent, unbreakable vow settled into his chest like a second heartbeat. He would watch over them both, from whatever distance the shadows required, for as long as it took to make it safe to come home. The city had a way of healing over wounds, the way skin heals over a splinter, sealing the pain inside rather than removing it. Amelia had learned to live inside that sealed wound. She had built a life, a small, careful, sturdy life, out of the wreckage of the one she'd planned to have. She worked as an interior designer now, having left the marketing firm where she'd been employed the year Vincent died, unable to bear the sympathetic glances of co-workers who had all attended, or nearly attended, a wedding that never happened. Design felt safer. It was about making broken or empty spaces beautiful again. And there was something in that work that mirrored, in its small way, what she had spent 5 years trying to do with herself. Leo was 4 now, a whirlwind of dark curls and dinosaur obsessions, and a laugh that some nights, when he was tired and unguarded, sounded so much like a laugh Amelia remembered from another life that it stole the breath clean out of her lungs. He asked about his father sometimes, in the sudden, sideways way children ask about the things that matter most. "Was my daddy tall?" he'd asked at breakfast just last week, apropos of nothing, spooning cereal with grave concentration. "Very tall," Amelia had said, throat tight. "Taller than me." "Did he like dinosaurs?" "I never asked him," she admitted. "But I think he would have loved yours especially, the Tyrannosaurus." Leo had nodded, satisfied by this, and gone back to his cereal, and Amelia had turned to the sink and let the water run loud enough to cover the small, private sound of her crying, the way she still did, sometimes, 5 years on, when grief caught her unaware in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday. They lived now in a narrow brownstone in South Boston, a modest 3-story building she had bought with the small settlement Salvatore's firm had eventually, grudgingly, arranged. Guilt money, she suspected, though for what precisely she was never quite told. The neighbourhood was quiet, tree-lined, full of families and dog walkers, and the particular unglamorous safety of a place nobody with money or power had any reason to notice. Which was precisely why, 6 months ago, when a new tenant moved into the brownstone 2 doors down, Amelia had thought nothing of him at all, beyond a polite, neighbourly curiosity. His name, as far as the building's other residents knew, was Nico Falco. He was tall, very tall, Leo would have said, with dark hair silvering faintly at the temples, despite what could not have been more than his late 30s, and eyes so dark they seemed, in certain light, to hold no bottom at all. He kept to himself mostly, worked from home in some vague capacity involving international shipping consultation that nobody quite understood or asked further about, and had a habit, noticed first by the elderly woman in 2B and then by half the street, of appearing exactly when help was needed and vanishing before thanks could properly be offered. It was Nico Falco who had shovelled the entire block's sidewalks during the brutal February storm, before dawn, so that nobody would slip on their way to work. It was Nico Falco who had quietly paid off the tab of a struggling young mother at the corner grocery when her card declined, then left before she could turn around and see who had done it. And it was Nico Falco, 6 weeks ago, who had been walking past the brownstone at exactly the moment Leo, chasing a runaway soccer ball into the street, had darted directly into the path of a delivery truck that the driver, texting, had not seen coming. Amelia had not witnessed it. She had only heard, from her open kitchen window, the horrific shriek of brakes, and had run outside with her heart in her throat to find her son standing safely on the curb, shaking, held firmly by the shoulders of a man she barely knew, whose face had gone the colour of ash, whose hands, she would notice later, had trembled for a full hour afterward, in a way that seemed entirely disproportionate to the mild scare of a near miss. "Thank you," she had said, breathless, scooping Leo into her arms, feeling his small heart hammering against her own chest. "Thank you. I don't know what would have—" "He's all right," the man had said, his voice low and rough, strangely thick, as though something in his throat had closed. "He's all right. That's all that matters." He had looked at Leo then, really looked at him, in a way that made something flicker, uneasy and unnameable, at the edge of Amelia's awareness, and for one strange, suspended moment his dark eyes had shone with something that looked, impossibly, like grief. Like a man looking at something he had lost and found again in the same unbearable instant. "Are you all right, Mr. Falco?" she'd asked, because his hands were still shaking, because his face had gone so pale. "Vincent," he'd said, and then, catching himself, correcting so quickly she almost missed it. "Nico. Sorry. Long day." She hadn't thought anything of the slip. Why would she? Grief had taught her 5 years ago that names sometimes catch in a person's throat for reasons that have nothing to do with anyone standing in front of them. She had thanked him again, taken her son inside, and thought no more of it, except that in the weeks that followed she began to notice how often Nico Falco seemed to simply be there. At the park, at a careful distance when Leo played. Outside the grocery store on the evenings she came home too exhausted to think about carrying bags up 3 flights of stairs alone. On the sidewalk in the mornings, always with some plausible, unremarkable reason for his presence, always careful never to intrude, never to ask for more than politeness allowed. She began, without quite admitting it to herself, to look for him. She did not know, could not possibly have known, that the man renting the brownstone 2 doors down under a false name was the same man she had buried 5 years earlier in a closed casket. That every dollar of careful help, every shovelled sidewalk, every quiet act of protection was the desperate, silent language of a man who had loved her too much to let her die, and now loved her too much to stay away. Even from a distance he had promised himself and his dead brother's memory he would never cross. She did not know that Vincent Moretti had spent 5 years dismantling, piece by piece, the empire that had once made him a target. Selling businesses, severing alliances, funneling resources into legitimate shell companies, waging a long, patient, silent war to make Boston safe enough for him to breathe in again. All so that one day he might stand in front of Amelia Hart not as a ghost haunting her from 2 doors down, but as a man who could finally tell her the truth. She only knew that when Nico Falco looked at her son, something in his face broke a little, every single time. She did not yet know why. Vincent had told himself the day he signed the 6-month lease on the brownstone under the name Nico Falco that he would simply watch. That was all. Watch from a safe distance, confirm with his own eyes that Amelia and his son were healthy, safe, unharmed by the ruins of the life he'd once built. And then he would leave, quietly, the way he had come, and let them go on living the peaceful, ordinary life he had bought them at the cost of his own name. He had not expected the boy to run directly into his arms. Not literally, not that first day, that terrifying day with the truck and the brakes shrieking and his own heart very nearly stopping entirely at the sight of his son, standing frozen in the road, but in every way that mattered since. Leo had a habit, Vincent was slowly, helplessly discovering, of attaching himself instantly and without reservation to anyone who showed him the smallest kindness. Within a month of that near miss, the boy had taken to greeting Vincent by name, Nico, with the kind of delighted, unguarded joy that undid something carefully constructed in Vincent's chest every single time he heard it. "Nico, look, I found a worm." "Nico, do you know how fast a T-Rex could run?" "Nico, will you push me on the swing? Mummy's arms get tired." He should have moved. He should have broken the lease, packed the few belongings he'd allowed himself, and disappeared to another city, another borrowed name, and let the wound scab back over the way it had been slowly scabbing for 5 years. Instead, he found himself, on a warm Tuesday evening in late spring, sitting on the low stone wall outside the brownstone, pushing his 4-year-old son on a rusted swing set in the small public park at the end of the street. Listening to a laugh that was, impossibly, achingly, his own laugh, echoed back at him across a generational gap he had never been permitted to close honestly. "Higher, Nico, higher! If I push you any higher, your mother will have my head," Vincent said, and Leo laughed with his whole small chest, and something in Vincent's own chest, long since armoured over, cracked another degree wider. "You're really good with him," Amelia said, appearing at the edge of the park with 2 coffees, offering him one without quite meeting his eyes, a habit he'd noticed she had whenever their conversations edged toward anything personal. "You don't have kids of your own?" The question landed like a blade between his ribs, precise and unexpected. "No," he said, and the single syllable cost him more than she could ever know. "I don't." "You'd be good at it," she said, settling onto the wall beside him, close enough that he could smell the particular clean scent of her shampoo, a scent that had haunted 5 years of restless nights in cities across 3 continents. "He's usually shy with new people. He warmed up to you so fast it actually surprised me." "Kids know," Vincent said carefully, "when someone means them well." Amelia was quiet a moment, watching her son swing, his dark curls catching the last gold light of the evening. "His father died before he was born," she said, the words coming out with the particular, flat, worn quality of a story told so many times it had lost its original sharpness. Though Vincent, watching her carefully, saw the small tightening at the corner of her mouth that suggested the wound beneath the flatness was still very much alive. "I don't talk about it much. But you asked about kids, so I don't know why I'm telling you this." "You don't have to explain anything to me," Vincent said, his voice rougher than he intended. "I know, She laughed, a small, self-deprecating sound. "It's strange. You're almost a stranger, and somehow it's easier to say it to you than to people who actually knew him. Everyone who knew Vincent has an opinion about what happened. My sister thinks he was a saint. His family lawyer clearly thinks I should stop asking questions. You're just new, uncomplicated." If she had struck him across the face, it would have hurt less than that word. Uncomplicated. "What was he like?" Vincent heard himself ask, hating himself instantly, unable to stop, starved for even this small, indirect, agonizing way of hearing her speak of him. Amelia's face changed, softened, opened, in a way Vincent had not seen in 5 years of watching from careful distances. "He was—" She paused, searching. "He was the most intense person I've ever met. Like everything he felt completely. When he loved you, you knew it, in your bones, every single day. And he was funny, underneath all that intensity, in this dry, unexpected way that used to catch me off guard." She glanced toward Leo, swinging, gap-toothed and gleeful, and something in her face cracked open with a grief so raw and unguarded that Vincent had to look away, had to fix his eyes on his own hands, gripping the edge of the stone wall until his knuckles went white. "He had this way of looking at me, like I was the only thing in the room that mattered. I haven't been looked at like that since." Vincent said nothing. He could not trust his voice. "I'm sorry," Amelia said, misreading his silence, touching his arm briefly, an ordinary, kind, devastating gesture. "That's a lot to unload on a neighbour over coffee." "Don't apologise," Vincent managed. "He sounds like he loved you very much." "He did," Amelia said, and there was something fierce in it, something that had survived 5 years of silence and unanswered questions entirely intact. "Whatever happened that night, and I've never fully understood what happened that night. I have never once doubted that Vincent Moretti loved me. I just wish he'd trusted me enough to let me help him, whatever it was. I wish he hadn't left me to guess." The words fell into Vincent like stones into still water, ripples he felt for hours afterward. He had told himself for 5 years that his silence had been the only way to keep her alive. He had never once let himself sit with the possibility that the silence itself had been its own kind of wound, separate from and nearly as devastating as his death. That in trying to protect her from Sabatini's reach, he had also, unknowingly, robbed her of the one thing grief needs most in order to heal: the truth. "Nico!" Leo called from the swing. "Watch this!" And he leapt off mid-arc, landing in an ungainly sprawl on the grass, laughing uproariously at his own daring, and Amelia gasped and rushed to check him for scrapes, And Vincent sat very still on the stone wall, watching the two people he loved more than his own life, more than his own name, more than the empire he'd sacrificed everything to dismantle, and understood with a clarity that terrified him that he could not keep doing this. Could not keep standing at this careful, agonizing distance, pretending to be a kind stranger, while his son called him by a false name, and his fiancée still, in every way that mattered to the part of him that had never stopped counting, grieved a man who was sitting 3 feet away from her. Something would have to break. He simply did not yet know. It would be Leo. 4 years old and unguarded and terrifyingly perceptive, who would be the one to break it. Summer settled over South Boston in slow, golden waves, and with it came a rhythm to the little street that Vincent had not expected to find himself woven into so thoroughly. He told himself each week that this would be the week he moved on. Each week he found some new reason to stay. A school event Leo begged him to attend, a broken pipe in Amelia's basement that he fixed himself rather than call a plumber. A Tuesday evening dinner Amelia invited him to almost apologetically. "Since you're always around anyway, and it seems silly for you to eat alone." He should have said no to the dinner. He said yes. It became, without either of them quite naming it, a habit. Tuesday nights, the 3 of them around Amelia's small kitchen table, Leo narrating elaborate dinosaur battles with his fork while Amelia laughed, and Vincent felt something in his chest loosen that he had believed, after everything, to be permanently seized shut. He watched Amelia move through her kitchen with the easy competence of a woman who had rebuilt an entire life with her own 2 hands. And he loved her. God help him. He loved her more now, having watched her survive what he'd done to her, than he had loved the softer, less battle-tested woman he'd proposed to 5 years ago. It was on one of these Tuesday nights, in early July, that Leo asked the question that would end everything. Amelia had stepped out to the porch to take a call from Claire, leaving Vincent alone with the boy at the table, both of them elbow-deep in the ruins of a half-finished puzzle depicting the solar system. Leo worked in the careful, absorbed silence of a child fully engaged in a task, fitting Saturn's rings into place with his small tongue poking out in concentration. And Vincent watched him with the specific, aching tenderness of a man who had missed 4 years of exactly this. Every ordinary evening, every puzzle, every gap-toothed grin he had no right to have missed, and no way to ever get back. "Nico," Leo said, not looking up from the puzzle, "can I ask you something?" "Anything," Vincent said, and meant it more than the boy could possibly know. "Do you love my mummy?" The question landed in Vincent's chest like a physical blow. He should have deflected. He'd had 5 years of training in deflection, in the careful construction of half-truths that protected everyone involved. Instead, faced with his own son's wide, guileless, dark eyes that were, he had noticed with an ache that never fully faded, his own eyes exactly, he found he could not lie. "Yes," Vincent said quietly, "I do." Leo nodded, as though this confirmed something he'd already suspected, and went back to the puzzle for a long moment, and Vincent allowed himself to hope, foolishly, that the conversation had reached its natural end. "Then why," Leo asked, still not looking up, his small brow furrowed with the particular grave seriousness children bring to questions adults spend their whole lives avoiding. "Do you always cry when you look at her?" The room seemed to tilt. "I don't cry," Vincent said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. "You do," Leo said, finally looking up, entirely matter of fact, entirely without malice, the way only a small child can deliver a devastating truth. "Your eyes get all shiny and wet, like Mummy's do when she looks at the pictures of my daddy." "You do it every time she's not looking. I see it. I'm little, but I see lots of things." Vincent sat frozen, a puzzle piece shaped like Jupiter's great red spot pinched between his fingers, and looked at his son. Really looked at him, in the unguarded, terrified way he had spent 5 months carefully avoiding, and felt the entire architecture of his careful lie begin, quietly, irrevocably, to collapse. "I had somebody I loved very much," Vincent said slowly, choosing each word as though it might detonate, "who I lost a long time ago. Sometimes, when I look at your mummy, she reminds me of that person. That's all it is, Leo. It's not a bad kind of crying. It's just remembering." It was not strictly a lie. It was, Vincent understood even as he said it, the closest he had come in 5 years to telling his son the truth, and the proximity of it, so close, so devastatingly close, and yet still a wall of falsehood standing between them, hurt worse than any outright lie ever could have. "Did she die?" Leo asked, with the frank curiosity of a child who had grown up around death without ever quite understanding its weight. "The person you loved?" "No," Vincent said, and something in his throat closed around the word. "She's very much alive. I just haven't been able to tell her how I feel yet." "Why not?" Leo asked, with the beautiful, brutal logic of a 4-year-old for whom love had never once seemed complicated. "If you love somebody, you should just tell them. That's what Mummy says. She says the worst thing in the whole world is not saying things you should have said." Vincent looked at his son, at the small, fierce, entirely unknowing face of the boy who had spent every Tuesday night for 2 months eating dinner across the table from his own father, without either of them saying the words that would change everything, and felt something break open in his chest, wide and irreversible. "Your mummy's very wise," he said, his voice thick. "I know," Leo said, with great satisfaction, and went back to the puzzle, as though the conversation for him had reached a perfectly ordinary, unremarkable conclusion, entirely unaware that he had just cracked open 5 years of carefully guarded silence with a single, unguarded child's question. Through the kitchen window, Vincent could see Amelia on the porch, phone pressed to her ear, laughing at something Claire had said, the porch light catching the gold in her hair, and he understood, with a clarity that arrived like a physical wound, that he could not do this any more, could not sit at her table one more Tuesday wearing a stranger's name, could not watch his son grow 1 more inch, learn 1 more word, ask 1 more devastating, innocent question, without telling them both the truth, whatever it cost him, whatever danger it might still carry, whatever right he had forfeited 5 years ago to ever ask for her forgiveness. He did not know, sitting there with Jupiter's great red spot still pinched between his fingers, that the reckoning would come that very night, in a rainstorm that would sweep across South Boston with biblical fury, and that before the sun rose again, Amelia Hart would learn the truth of the 5 years she had spent grieving a man who had never actually died at all. The rain began just after 9, a low grumble of thunder rolling in off the harbour that sent Leo, full of pasta and dinosaur facts and the particular boneless exhaustion of a well-loved child, up to bed without complaint, tucked in by his mother, while Vincent lingered in the doorway of Amelia's small kitchen, unable to leave, unable to stay, caught in a limbo that had defined the entirety of the past 5 months, and could not, he understood now, with the boy's questions still ringing in his ears, define 1 single hour more. "You're quiet tonight," Amelia said, coming back downstairs, drying her hands on a dish towel, studying him with the particular perceptiveness that had, he suspected, made her exceptionally difficult to lie to even before he'd started actively trying. "More than usual, and you're usually pretty quiet." "Leo asked me a question earlier," Vincent said, "while you were on the porch." Something flickered across Amelia's face, not alarm exactly, but a kind of alert attention, the look of a mother accustomed to her son's occasional, unfiltered directness. "What did he ask?" "He asked if I loved you," Vincent said, and watched Amelia go very still. "I told him yes." The rain had picked up outside, hammering now against the kitchen window in earnest sheets, and somewhere in the distance thunder rolled long and low across the water, and Amelia stood in the middle of her own kitchen, with the dish towel forgotten in her hands, looking at Vincent Moretti, at Nico Falco. The name still felt like ash in his mouth, with an expression he could not fully read. "That's a strange thing to tell a 4-year-old, she said carefully. "He also told me," Vincent continued, because he had come this far and could not stop now, could not retreat back into the careful lies that had cost him 5 years of his son's life already, "that I cry when I look at you, that I do it every time you're not watching. He said I look at you the way you look at his father's picture." Amelia set the dish towel down very slowly on the counter. "Nico." "That's not my name," Vincent said. The kitchen went silent except for the drumming rain, and Vincent watched something shift in Amelia's face. Confusion first, then a kind of dawning, disbelieving alarm. The particular expression of a person whose mind is racing ahead of what they're prepared to hear, trying to construct innocent explanations for a sentence that admits of none. "What are you talking about?" she said, and it wasn't quite a question. "I need you to sit down," Vincent said, and his voice, to his own ears, sounded like it belonged to someone else entirely, someone very young, someone very frightened, someone who had spent 5 years rehearsing this exact moment in 1,000 sleepless nights, and found, now that it had arrived, that none of the rehearsals had prepared him for the reality of her face. "I don't want to sit down. I want you to tell me what you're talking about, right now, before I—" She stopped, pressed a hand to her mouth, and Vincent watched 5 years of buried grief and unanswered questions rise up behind her eyes all at once. A dam he had built and was now, deliberately, about to break. "Nico, what is going on?" "Amelia." He had not said her name, her true name, spoken the way only he had ever spoken it, low and reverent and aching, in 5 years, and the sound of it in his own mouth undid something in his chest entirely. "Look at me." Really look at me." She looked at him. He watched her gaze move over his face, the same face, older now, lined by 5 years of grief and distance and a war fought entirely in silence, but the same face nonetheless, the face she had once traced with her fingertips on a rooftop covered in fairy lights, the face she had once promised to love for the rest of her life. He watched the recognition arrive in her eyes, not as a single flash, but as a slow, horrifying dawn, feature by feature. The tilt of his jaw, the particular darkness of his eyes, the way he stood, the way he had always stood, like a man braced for a blow he refused to flinch from. "No," she said, and her voice broke on the single syllable. "No, that's not... You're not... Amelia, you're dead." Her voice rose, cracking, 5 years of controlled grief shattering in real time across her face. "I buried you. I stood at your grave in my wedding dress because I couldn't stop wearing it. I raised our son alone for 5 years, thinking you were dead. And you're telling me, you're standing in my kitchen, telling me—" "I never died," Vincent said, and the words, spoken aloud for the first time in 5 years, felt like a confession dragged up from the bottom of the ocean. "I've been alive this entire time. I let you believe I was dead because it was the only way to keep you and Leo safe from the people who tried to kill me the night before our wedding. I have spent 5 years dismantling everything that made you a target, and the moment I believed it was safe, I came back. Not to reveal myself, I told myself, just to watch, just to make sure you were both all right from a distance. And then Leo asked me why I cried when I looked at you, and I couldn't lie to him. Not one more day. Not one more hour." Amelia stood frozen in the middle of her kitchen. Rain hammering the windows, her whole body trembling, and for a long, terrible moment, Vincent thought she might simply collapse, might shatter entirely under the weight of 5 years of grief revealed. In a single sentence, to have been unnecessary. To have been built on a lie he had chosen for her without ever asking whether she wanted to be protected at such a cost. "Get out," she said, very quietly, and the quiet was somehow worse than screaming would have been. "Get out of my house. Amelia, please, let me explain. You let me bury an empty box, Vincent." Her voice cracked entirely now, 5 years of grief pouring out in a single, unbroken flood. "You let me raise our son alone. You let me think you didn't trust me enough to marry me, or that you'd changed your mind, or that something so terrible had happened you couldn't even leave me a note. Do you have any idea at all, what those 5 years have been like? And you were here. You were here for 5 months, sitting at my table, pushing my son on the swings, letting him call you by a name that isn't yours, and you didn't say one word. I was trying to protect you. You were trying to protect yourself," she shouted, and the words hung in the storm-lashed kitchen like a verdict. "From having to face what you'd done to me. Get out, Vincent. Get out of my house, right now, before I call the police, and tell them the man I buried is standing in my kitchen, and I have absolutely no idea what to do with that information." Vincent stood in the doorway a moment longer, rain lashing the window behind him, his heart breaking in real time at the sight of the woman he loved shattering in front of him, under the weight of a truth he should have told her 5 months ago. 5 years ago, the very first night he'd watched her weeping from a hospital window, he'd had no right to be standing at. Then he turned and walked out into the storm, and Amelia Hart sank slowly to the kitchen floor and wept. For the wedding that never happened. For the 5 years of grief that had, apparently, all been for nothing. For the son upstairs, who had unknowingly spent 5 months building a bond with the father he'd been told was dead, and did not hear, over the sound of her own devastation, the particular soft creak of the stairs behind her, or see her son standing in the doorway in his pyjamas, having heard every single word. Leo stood very still at the bottom of the stairs, his stuffed T-Rex clutched against his chest, watching his mother cry on the kitchen floor in a way he had only seen once before, years ago, on a night he barely remembered, the night he would understand only much later, that had been the anniversary of his father's death. "Mummy?" Amelia's head snapped up, and she scrubbed frantically at her face with the back of her hand, the useless automatic gesture of every parent who has ever been caught mid-collapse by a small witness. "Baby, you're supposed to be asleep. Was that my daddy?" Leo asked, with the terrifying directness that Vincent had already learned over 5 months of Tuesday dinners was entirely characteristic of him. "Was Nico my daddy?" Amelia's face crumpled entirely, and Leo crossed the kitchen and climbed into her lap without waiting to be invited, the way he had done 1,000 times before, when he sensed, with the wordless empathy of very young children, that his mother needed holding more than she needed answering. And Amelia wrapped her arms around her son and rocked him on the kitchen floor while the storm raged outside, and did not, for a long while, say anything at all. "I heard him say he loves you," Leo said eventually, muffled against her shoulder. "And I heard you say he let you think he was dead. Is that true? Is Nico really my daddy?" "I think so, baby," Amelia whispered, because she could not, even now, even furious and shattered and reeling, bring herself to lie to her son, the way she had just discovered Vincent had lied to her for 5 years. "I think he is." "Then why did you tell him to leave?" Leo pulled back, looking at his mother with an expression of pure, uncomplicated confusion, the particular bewilderment of a child for whom the return of a long-lost parent seemed like the most obviously wonderful thing that could possibly happen, entirely unclouded by the adult complexities of betrayal and grief and 5 stolen years. "I liked Nico. I like him a lot. If he's my daddy, isn't that good?" "It's complicated, sweetheart," Amelia said, the words tasting like ash even as she said them, hearing in her own voice the echo of every evasive adult who had ever told a child that grief and love could not simply, purely coexist without complication. "You always say I should tell people when I'm sad, instead of yelling at them," Leo said, with the devastating moral clarity unique to 4-year-olds. "You said that to me last week when I got mad at Tommy for breaking my dinosaur. You said being mad doesn't fix things, but talking does." Amelia let out a sound that was half a sob and half a broken, disbelieving laugh, because her own son had just, without any apparent awareness of the enormity of what he was doing, thrown her own parenting advice back at her at the exact moment she least wanted to hear it and most needed to. "It's not the same thing, Leo." "Why not?" She had no answer for him. She sat on her kitchen floor in the wreckage of 5 years of carefully constructed grief, holding the son she had raised entirely alone, and found that she genuinely, in that moment, did not have an answer for her own 4-year-old that adequately explained why 5 years of pain did not simply dissolve the moment the person who'd caused it appeared, however remorseful, however loving, in her kitchen doorway. Outside, the storm had not eased. If anything, it had worsened. Wind driving rain sideways against the windows in great grey sheets. And somewhere in the back of her mind, even through her grief, Amelia registered a small, unwelcome flicker of worry. Vincent had walked out into that storm with nowhere, as far as she knew, to properly shelter, having presumably abandoned the pretense of the brownstone 2 doors down the moment his real name left his mouth. "Where did he go?" Leo asked, as if reading her thoughts, twisting to look toward the dark window. "I don't know, baby." "Is he coming back?" Amelia did not answer, because she genuinely did not know. Did not know if Vincent Moretti, having finally told her the truth after 5 years of silence, would consider his obligation discharged and disappear again into whatever shadowed life he'd built for himself, or whether he would fight, the way the Vincent she remembered had always fought for the things he loved, with a ferocity that had once made her feel like the safest, most cherished woman alive. She thought of him standing in her kitchen doorway, rain-soaked hair, dark eyes wet with an emotion she had refused, in her fury, to let herself fully witness. She thought of 5 months of Tuesday dinners, of a man who had shovelled her sidewalk in the dark before dawn, paid a stranger's grocery bill in secret, thrown himself in the path of danger to save her son from a truck he could not have known was coming unless some deeper animal instinct had recognized his own blood in the road. She thought of the particular way he had looked at Leo every single time, with an expression she had mistaken for simple neighbourly warmth, and now understood to have been a father's unbearable, silent grief. "I don't know if he's coming back," she said, finally, honestly, to her son. "But I think I need to find out." She carried Leo up to bed, tucked him in with the T-Rex clutched against his chest, and sat on the edge of his bed a long while, listening to the storm, turning over 5 years of grief and 5 months of careful lies and one devastating, honest confession, trying to find some solid ground in the wreckage of everything she thought she'd known about her own life. It was nearly midnight when she finally went to the window and looked down at the street, half expecting it to be empty, half dreading and half hoping to see him still there. He was still there. Vincent Moretti stood on the sidewalk outside her house, soaked entirely through, unmoving, staring up at her lit windows with an expression of such total, unguarded devastation that Amelia's breath caught in her throat. He had not left. He had not gone back to whatever shadowed refuge he'd built for himself. He had simply stood there in the pouring rain for the better part of 2 hours, unable to leave the only home that had ever truly mattered to him. Waiting. For what, she did not yet know. Whether forgiveness or simply the mercy of one more glimpse of the life he'd sacrificed everything to protect from a distance. Amelia stood at the window a long moment, her hand pressed flat against the cold glass, watching the man she had buried 5 years ago stand vigil in a storm outside the house he had helped, unknowingly, to fill with a child who was unmistakably his own. Then, very slowly, she went downstairs and opened the front door. The door opened, and Vincent looked up from the flooded sidewalk to see Amelia standing in the frame of golden light spilling from her hallway, and something in his chest, already raw and exposed, tore open entirely. "You're going to catch pneumonia standing out there," she said, and her voice was not warm. Not yet, not close to warm, but it was not the voice of a woman ordering him off her property either, and Vincent found himself moving toward her before conscious thought had fully caught up with his feet. "I didn't come back to ask for your forgiveness," he said, and the words, rehearsed 1,000 times in 5 years of sleepless nights, came out of him now in a rush, rough and unrehearsed, despite the years of preparation, because nothing he had imagined saying to her had accounted for the reality of standing in front of her again, soaked through, stripped of every defense he had spent a lifetime building. "I know I don't deserve it. I know nothing I say tonight can give you back the 5 years I took from you, or the 5 years Leo spent not knowing his father was alive. And I am not asking you to simply forget any of that, because I haven't forgotten it either, not one single day of it." He was on his knees before he fully registered moving, the cold, wet stone of her front walk biting through his trousers, rain streaming down his face, indistinguishable now from the tears he no longer had the strength or the will to hide. And Amelia stood in her doorway, looking down at him. Vincent Moretti, the most feared man in Boston for a decade and a half, kneeling in the rain outside her front door, like a man begging for his life. "I came back," he said, his voice breaking entirely, "because my heart never left you. Not for a single day of those 5 years. I built an entire second life, an entire false identity, dismantled everything my father and I spent decades building, fought a war in the shadows against men who would have killed you and our son without a second thought. All of it, every single piece of it, so that one day I could stand in front of you again and tell you the truth. I told myself I'd wait until it was completely safe. I told myself I'd wait until there was no possible way my presence could put either of you in danger. But the truth is, Amelia, I would have waited forever. Because waiting felt safer than facing what I'd have to see in your eyes the moment you learned what I'd done. Leo asked me a question tonight that I couldn't lie my way around anymore, and I am so profoundly sorry that it took a 4-year-old's honesty to give me the courage that 5 years of loving you from a distance never did." Amelia stood in the doorway a long moment, rain misting sideways to touch her face, her arms wrapped tight around herself, and Vincent knelt in the flooding street and let her look at him, really look at him, the way she had refused to fully look at him in the kitchen, taking in every line grief and war had carved into a face she had once known better than her own. "Why," she said finally, her voice raw, "didn't you send word? Even once? A letter, a phone call, anything? 5 years, Vincent, 5 years I stood at a grave that had nothing in it. 5 years I told our son bedtime stories about a father who was, apparently, alive this entire time, close enough that he moved 2 doors down from us and let his own son call him by a stranger's name. Because Sabatini had eyes everywhere," Vincent said. "Because the man who betrayed me, my own brother, Amelia, my own blood, warned me that any sign of contact, any indication at all that I was still breathing, would be a death sentence for you, and, once I learned of him, for our son. I spent the first 2 years simply surviving, rebuilding resources under names that couldn't be traced. I spent the next 2 dismantling the very organization that made you a target, piece by piece, selling businesses, severing every alliance, until there was nothing left of the Moretti Empire that any rival family had reason to still care about. I came back to Boston 8 months ago and spent 2 more months watching from a distance, making absolutely certain it was safe before I let myself get close enough to actually speak to you. Every single day of those 5 years, I made the calculation that your grief, terrible as I knew it to be, was survivable in a way your death would not have been. I was wrong to make that choice for you without your consent. I understand that now, fully, and I will spend whatever years you allow me trying to make it right. But I was not wrong that the danger was real, Amelia. I was not lying about that, even if I was wrong about everything else. The rain had soaked entirely through both of them now, Amelia standing in her doorway with her cardigan plastered dark against her shoulders, Vincent kneeling on the flooded walk, with water running in rivulets down a face that had aged 5 hard years since she'd last touched it. "Get up," she said finally, quietly. "Please, get up, Vincent. I can't have this conversation with you on your knees in the street like some kind of penance. Get up." He rose, slowly, and for a moment they simply stood there, 3 feet apart, rain hammering the pavement between them, 5 years of grief and love and betrayal and longing crowded into that small, drenched distance. "I don't know how to just forgive this," Amelia said, her voice shaking. "I don't know how to just fold 5 years of grief up into a box and put it away because you finally decided to tell me the truth. I raised our son alone, Vincent. I went to a therapist for 2 years because I couldn't understand why my grief never resolved into anything like peace. I dated exactly 1 man in 5 years and broke it off after 3 months because some part of me apparently never stopped believing you were still out there, somehow. Which now turns out to have been true in the most literal, infuriating way possible." "I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight," Vincent said. "I'm not asking you to forgive me this month or this year. I am asking you, if you'll allow it, to let me start proving, in whatever small ways you'll permit, that everything I did because I loved you and our son more than I loved my own survival. I'll answer every question. I'll tell you everything, every detail of that night, every year since, everything Dante did, and everything I've done to try to atone for it. I am not going anywhere, Amelia, whether you let me back into your life or not. I will not disappear on you again. That much, at least, I can promise you, absolutely." Amelia stood in her doorway, a long, silent moment, the rain beginning finally to ease into a softer, steadier fall, and looked at the father of her child, the man she had loved, buried, grieved, and now impossibly found alive, and felt something in her chest that was not yet forgiveness, was not yet anything so simple or so complete, but was, perhaps, the very first fragile step toward it. "Come inside," she said finally. "You're soaked through, and Leo will want to see you in the morning, and I am not ready to send you back out into that storm, whatever else I'm not ready for yet." Vincent followed her inside, out of the rain, into the golden light of the house where his son slept upstairs, and understood, with a gratitude so profound it nearly buckled his knees a second time, that he had just been given something he had not truly believed in 5 years of exile he would ever be given again. A chance. They sat at the kitchen table where, hours earlier, a puzzle of the solar system had sat half-finished, now cleared away, replaced by 2 cups of tea neither of them touched, and Vincent told her everything. He told her about the night before the wedding, the gunman in his bedroom, Dante's tear-streaked face in the doorway, the $4 million in gambling debts that had made his own brother a weapon aimed at his heart. He told her about the tunnel beneath the building, built decades earlier by his father for exactly this kind of catastrophe, and the staged scene left behind for the police to find, his clothes on a stranger's corpse, his ring left on the nightstand like a final, devastating clue. "Whose body was it?" Amelia asked, her voice hollow, and Vincent watched the question cost her something even to ask. "One of the men sent to kill me," Vincent said. Dante altered the scene enough, with help from a coroner our family had leverage over, that identification could be made through dental records that had been quietly falsified years earlier for exactly this kind of contingency. "My father built escape routes into everything, Amelia, even into death itself. I never wanted to use any of it. I never imagined I'd have to. And Dante just let me believe you were dead. For 5 years, stood beside me at your grave and said nothing. He believed, and I believed, that it was the only way to keep you alive," Vincent said. "Sabatini did not simply want me dead, Amelia. He wanted the Moretti name erased, root and branch, and that meant anyone connected to it. If he had learned I survived, if he had learned that Dante had lied to him about completing the job, he would have come for you specifically, to make certain I understood the price of surviving. I know now, hearing you describe 5 years of unresolved grief, that the cost of my silence was higher than I let myself believe at the time. But I want you to understand, I did not choose an easy path over a hard one. I chose the path I believed with everything I had was the only way to keep you and, once I learned of him, our son, breathing." "Where is Dante now?" Amelia asked. Was he punished? Did Sabatini ever find out the truth?" Something dark moved across Vincent's face. "Dante spent 2 years believing he'd destroyed both his brother and his own soul in a single night. He tried, in his own broken way, to atone, fed me information, protected certain interests from a distance, worked quietly against Sabatini's expansion into territory that would have hurt you specifically, though you never knew any of it. 18 months ago, Sabatini discovered the deception, discovered that Dante had lied about my death, that I was alive somewhere, rebuilding. He had Dante killed for it." Amelia's hand flew to her mouth. "Vincent, I don't ask for sympathy for him," Vincent said, his voice rough, old grief and old fury tangled together in a way that had never fully resolved, not in 18 months, not ever. What he did to us can never be undone. But he died trying to protect the 2 of you, in the end, in the only broken way he knew how, and I have had to make peace, somehow, with mourning a brother who both destroyed my life and, in his final act, tried desperately to save it." "That's why you finally felt safe enough to come back," Amelia said slowly, understanding dawning. "Sabatini believes you're dead. Dante's death confirmed it in his mind. There was no one left alive who could contradict the story. Sabatini believes the Moretti line ended 18 months ago," Vincent confirmed. "As far as he and every rival family in this city know, Vincent Moretti has been dead for 5 years, and his brother, the last of the bloodline, died protecting a secret with him. I spent the year after Dante's death systematically confirming that belief was airtight, tracing every remaining connection, making absolutely certain that nothing, no financial trail, no surviving associate, nothing could resurrect the truth. Only when I was completely certain did I come back to Boston. I told myself I would simply watch, from a distance, exactly as I had for the 3 years before that. I did not plan to become Nico Falco to you and Leo. I did not plan for any of what happened over these past 5 months. I told myself every single day that I would leave before it became this complicated. "Why didn't you?" Amelia asked quietly. "Leave, I mean, before it got complicated." Vincent looked at her for a long moment, rain still ticking softly against the windows as the storm finally spent itself, and something in his dark eyes, the same eyes, she realized now, looking at him fully for the first time in this new, terrible, honest light that Leo had inherited entirely, down to the particular way they went soft only for the people he loved most, opened wide, with an honesty that had cost him, she understood, everything he had left. "Because the first time I saw Leo run into the street after that soccer ball," Vincent said, his voice breaking, "and I got to him half a second before that truck did, and I held my son, Amelia, alive, breathing, safe, in my arms for the first time in his entire life. I understood that I could not simply watch anymore. I told myself I would only stay long enough to be certain you were both safe, and then disappear again, let you go on with your life without ever knowing I'd been close enough to touch. But every Tuesday you invited me to dinner. Every time Leo called my name across that park, every ordinary, extraordinary moment of watching my son grow up in small, stolen fragments, I found I could not make myself leave. I told myself 1 more week, then 1 more. I have been telling myself 1 more week for 5 months, Amelia, because the alternative, leaving you both again, disappearing a second time, was a cruelty I discovered I did not have in me to commit twice. Amelia sat very still, tears tracking silently down her face, and reached across the small kitchen table, the same table where, hours earlier, her son had asked Vincent an innocent question that had shattered 5 years of careful silence, and covered his hand with her own. "I am so angry with you," she said, her voice thick. "I don't know if I've ever been angrier at anyone in my entire life, and I don't know how long that anger is going to last, or what it's going to look like living alongside whatever else I feel for you, which is still there, Vincent, whatever else is true, and that terrifies me almost as much as the anger does." "I'm not asking you to resolve any of it tonight," Vincent said, turning his hand beneath hers, lacing their fingers together for the first time in 5 years, a small, careful gesture that felt to both of them like the first stone laid in the reconstruction of something neither of them yet knew how to name. "I'm only asking for the chance to try, however long it takes. However much of the anger I have to sit with, unresolved, while you decide whether there's anything left worth rebuilding." Upstairs, unheard by either of them, Leo had fallen back asleep, clutching his stuffed T-Rex, dreaming, as 4-year-olds do, uncomplicated dreams, entirely unburdened by the enormous, fragile, terrifying work of reconciliation happening in the kitchen below. Work that would take, in the weeks and months that followed, far more than a single rain-soaked confession to complete, but which had, that night, at long last, truly begun. Vincent did not stay the night. Some boundaries Amelia had made clear as the storm finally broke into a soft, exhausted drizzle near 2 in the morning could not be crossed simply because the truth had finally been spoken aloud. He had nodded, understanding completely, and walked the 2 doors down through the wet, quiet street back to the brownstone that had, for 5 months, been the closest thing to home he'd allowed himself, and had not slept at all, lying instead in the dark, replaying every word of the conversation, every flicker of expression on Amelia's face, searching for some sign of what the coming days might hold. She texted him at 7 the next morning. "Come for breakfast. Leo has questions." Leo, it turned out, had a great many questions, delivered over a bowl of cereal going soggy in his distraction, with the same frank, unfiltered directness that had cracked the whole situation open the night before. "Are you really my daddy?" "I am," Vincent said, kneeling down to Leo's eye level at the kitchen table, his heart hammering in a way it had not hammered even in the moments before gunfights, ambushes, the particular controlled terror of a life spent constantly under threat. Nothing had ever frightened him the way this small, curious, gap-toothed face frightened him now. "Where were you?" "I had to go away to keep you and your mummy safe," Vincent said carefully, the explanation he'd rehearsed 100 times in the small hours of the night, calibrated for a 4-year-old's understanding without diminishing the truth. "There were bad people who wanted to hurt our family, and the only way to protect you both was to let everyone believe I was gone. I know that was wrong of me, in a lot of ways. I know it hurt you and your mummy very badly, even though I never wanted it to. I'm sorry, Leo. I'm more sorry than I know how to say." Leo considered this with the grave seriousness he brought to all matters of importance, dinosaurs and fathers alike given equal weight in his 4-year-old universe. "Are the bad people still around?" "No," Vincent said, and meant it with an absolute certainty that had taken him 5 years and untold resources to earn. "They're gone. You're safe. Your mummy's safe. That's why I could finally tell you the truth." "Okay," Leo said, with the startling, uncomplicated grace children bring to forgiveness. A grace Vincent understood, watching Amelia's face across the kitchen, would take considerably longer to extend from the adult in the room. "Can you still push me on the swings? Even though you're my daddy now, and not just Nico?" "Every single day, if you want me to," Vincent said, his voice breaking slightly, and Leo grinned his gap-toothed grin and declared the conversation evidently entirely concluded, returning his full attention to his rapidly disintegrating cereal. The weeks that followed settled into a strange, tender, uncertain rhythm. Vincent did not move back in. Amelia had been clear, in the days after that first devastating conversation, that trust was not something 5 years of absence could be undone by a single rain-soaked confession, however sincere. But he came every day. He was there for breakfast most mornings and for the school drop-off, standing at the edge of Leo's small preschool with the other parents, learning the particular unglamorous choreography of ordinary family life he had spent 5 years watching from careful, aching distances. He was there for dinner most evenings, though he still returned each night to the brownstone 2 doors down, the space between them narrowing by degrees, but not yet closing entirely. Amelia watched him in those weeks with an attention that felt to Vincent almost unbearably exposing. Watched him learn the small rituals of Leo's life, the particular way the boy needed his socks matched exactly, or he'd refuse to wear either. The bedtime story rotation he insisted upon with the rigid, delighted tyranny of small children. The particular fear of thunderstorms that had, Vincent understood with a fresh ache, developed sometime in the 5 years he'd been absent, for storms that would otherwise have found him holding his son through them. "You're good at this," Amelia said one evening in late July, watching from the doorway as Vincent read Leo his third requested bedtime story, doing the voices with a commitment that had, in another life, made grown men in boardrooms sweat with fear, and now made a 4-year-old shriek with delighted laughter. "I had 5 years to imagine every single moment I was missing," Vincent said quietly, once Leo had finally fully surrendered to sleep, the two of them standing together in the hallway outside his door in the soft dark. "I used to lie awake in whatever city I was hiding in and try to imagine what he looked like, what he sounded like, whether he had my temper or your patience. I never once let myself imagine I'd actually get to find out." "Do you regret it?" Amelia asked. "The 5 years, everything you gave up to protect us?" Vincent considered the question with the same care he gave to every question she'd asked him in these strange, tender weeks, unwilling to offer her anything less than complete honesty ever again. "I regret the pain it caused you. I will regret that for the rest of my life, and I don't expect that regret to ever fully resolve. Nor do I think it should. But do I regret the choice itself, faced with the same circumstances again? No. I would make the same choice 1,000 times over, because the alternative was a version of this world where you and Leo were not standing here, in this hallway with me tonight. And I could not live in that version of the world, Amelia. I genuinely do not believe I could survive it." Amelia was quiet a long moment, studying his face in the dim hallway light. 5 years of grief and 5 months of careful watching, and one devastating night of truth, all folded together somewhere behind her eyes. "I believe you," she said finally. "I want you to know that, whatever else is still unresolved between us, I believe every word you've told me. I believe you loved us enough to disappear. I'm just still learning how to believe that love enough to let you fully back in." "Take whatever time you need," Vincent said. "I've already proven I can wait 5 years. I can wait as many more as it takes." She looked at him a long moment in the hallway dark. Something soft and uncertain and cautiously hopeful moving across her face, and reached up, slowly, to touch his cheek. The first time she had touched him with anything like tenderness since the night the truth had broken everything open. And Vincent closed his eyes and leaned into the touch, like a man finally, after 5 long years in the desert, allowed a single sip of water. "Good night, Vincent," she whispered. "Good night, Amelia," he said, and walked home through the quiet summer dark, 2 doors down, and for the first time in 5 years slept. The peace, when it broke from a direction neither of them had anticipated. It was early August, 6 weeks after the storm that had cracked 5 years of silence wide open, and Vincent had begun, cautiously, to let himself believe that the life he'd spent 5 years fighting for might actually, finally, be within reach. When Salvatore, the Moretti family's longtime lawyer, called him with a voice that instantly set every old, dormant instinct in Vincent's body back on high alert. "There's a man asking questions," Salvatore said without preamble the moment Vincent answered, "about the Moretti estate, about the circumstances of your death. He's not with any family, I recognize, but he's thorough, Vincent, and he's persistent, and 3 days ago he showed up at the cemetery asking the groundskeeper detailed questions about your burial plot that no ordinary curious stranger would think to ask." "Who is he?" "A private investigator, name of Marcus Riley. As far as I can determine, he's not working for Sabatini or any of the old families. Sabatini's dead in any case, killed in a territory dispute with the Kozlovs 8 months ago, which I assumed you already knew." Vincent had not known. The news landed strangely. The man whose vendetta had cost him 5 years of his life, dead in some unrelated dispute, the entire architecture of danger he'd spent 5 years dismantling, piece by piece, rendered, in some sense, moot by an event entirely outside his control. Then who's paying Riley? "That," Salvatore said grimly, "is what concerns me. I traced the retainer back through 2 shell accounts before it went cold, but the trail I did manage to follow leads back to Providence. To your father's old rivals, Vincent, the Castellano family." Vincent's blood ran cold. The Castellanos had been his father's bitterest enemies for 2 decades before an uneasy truce, brokered in blood and money, had finally settled the war between the families. A truce that had held, brittle but intact, for the entirety of Vincent's tenure as boss, precisely because both sides understood that reopening it would cost more than either family could afford. But a truce built on the assumption of Vincent Moretti's continued existence and enforced by the fear of his retaliation would mean nothing at all to a family that believed him 5 years dead. "If they discover I'm alive," Vincent said slowly, working through the implications with the same cold, methodical precision that had once made him one of the most effective bosses Boston had ever seen, "they'll assume it means the old truce is void, that the Moretti territory, the businesses I sold off, the alliances I severed. They'll wonder what else I've been hiding. They'll wonder if I'm rebuilding. And if they believe that, Salvatore, they won't wait to find out whether it's true before they act." "There's more," Salvatore said, and something in his voice made Vincent's stomach drop entirely. "Riley's been seen in South Boston, twice in the past week, near a residential street. I don't yet know if he's identified your current location specifically, but Vincent, if he's found where you've been living, there is a very real possibility he's also seen Ms. Hart and the boy." Vincent was already moving, phone pressed to his ear, crossing the 2 doors to Amelia's brownstone before Salvatore had finished speaking, every instinct that had kept him alive through 15 years of mafia warfare screaming a single, unbearable alarm. Amelia answered the door, with Leo perched on her hip, both of them mid-laughter over some private joke, and the sight of them, safe and whole and utterly unaware, nearly buckled Vincent's knees with relief, even as the danger Salvatore had just described settled cold and heavy in his chest. "Vincent, what's wrong?" Amelia asked instantly, reading the alarm on his face with the perceptiveness 5 years of solitary parenting had sharpened in her. "I need you to pack a bag," Vincent said quietly, careful to keep his voice light for Leo's sake, even as every word cost him enormous control. "Just for a few days, both of you. I'll explain everything, but I need you to trust me on this one thing, without questions, right now, the way you haven't had to trust me in 6 weeks." Amelia's face went pale. old fear surfacing instantly beneath the careful new peace they'd built together. Is it starting again? Everything you just spent 5 months telling me was over. I don't know yet, Vincent admitted, hating the honesty even as he gave it, because he had promised her, standing in that rain-soaked doorway, that he would never lie to her again, not even to spare her fear. But I'm not taking any chances with the two of you, not after everything it cost to get here. Please, Amelia, pack a bag. I have a place, secure, private, somewhere no one will think to look, and I need you both there while I find out exactly what we're dealing with. Amelia looked at him a long, searching moment, Leo shifting sleepily against her shoulder, and Vincent watched her make, in real time, the terrible calculation that love under threat always demands. The choice between fear and trust, offered again exactly when trust had only just begun, tentatively, to rebuild itself. "Okay," she said finally, quietly. "Okay, Vincent. Give us 20 minutes. As she turned to go pack, Vincent caught her wrist, gently, and she paused, looking back at him. "I will not let anything happen to either of you," he said, his voice low and fierce, the voice of the man who had once ruled an empire through sheer force of will, resurfacing now in service of the only cause that had ever truly mattered to him. Not again. Not ever. I have spent 5 years and everything I had rebuilding a life safe enough to bring you both into. I am not losing it now, Amelia. I promise you that. She held his gaze a long moment, something steady and trusting settling into her expression despite the fear still evident beneath it. I believe you, she said. Go. I'll be ready. 20 minutes later, Vincent Moretti loaded his fiancée and his son into an armoured car he had kept, quietly, on retainer for exactly this kind of contingency, and drove north out of Boston toward a secured property in New Hampshire that no record anywhere connected to his name, old or new, understanding with grim, familiar clarity that the war he had spent 5 years believing finished might, after all, be only just beginning again. The property Vincent drove them to sat at the end of a long gravel drive in the White Mountains foothills. A sprawling log and stone house purchased 4 years earlier under a shell corporation so thoroughly buried that even Salvatore, who knew nearly everything about Vincent's affairs, had needed 3 separate calls to locate the deed when Vincent asked him to prepare it for exactly this kind of emergency. "You built this place 4 years ago?" Amelia asked, standing in the great room as evening light slanted gold through tall windows overlooking a still, dark lake. Leo already racing from room to room in the particular delighted chaos of a 4-year-old discovering an enormous new space to explore. "I built several places like this," Vincent said, setting their hastily packed bags down by the door. "In case I was ever able to come back for you, I wanted somewhere safe to bring you. I didn't know if I'd ever actually use it. Some nights I didn't believe I would." Amelia moved to the window, watching the last light fade over the water, and Vincent watched her carefully, the particular fear that had lived in her eyes since he'd shown up at her door in a rush that afternoon, still evident beneath the calm she was working hard to project for Leo's sake. "Tell me the truth," she said quietly, not turning from the window. "How bad is this?" Vincent came to stand beside her, close but not touching, giving her the space she'd need to hear this fully. "There's a rival family. The Castellanos, old enemies of my father's, who may have learned I'm alive. If they have, they'll assume the truce that's kept the peace in Boston for 15 years is void, and they'll move against whatever they believe remains of the Moretti interests. That's the immediate danger. The longer-term danger is that if word spreads that I survived, other families who considered old debts settled by my death may reconsider that as well. And Leo? Me? You're both civilians, as far as anyone in that world is concerned, Vincent said carefully, which under normal circumstances would offer real protection. The old codes are clear that families don't target civilians. But Sabatini broke that code once already, 5 years ago, trying to reach me through you, and I have no guarantee the Castellanos would honour a boundary Sabatini didn't. I'm not willing to gamble your safety on the goodwill of men I have no reason to trust. Amelia was quiet a long moment, arms wrapped around herself, watching darkness settle fully over the lake. 5 years I spent building a life where I never had to think about any of this, she said finally. Where the worst danger in my day was Leo running too close to traffic or forgetting his lunch. And now I'm standing in a safe house you built specifically because you always knew this day might come. I know, Vincent said quietly. I know what I'm asking of you, bringing this back into your life after everything. If you want, once this immediate threat is resolved, I will do whatever it takes. Disappear again, if that's truly what would keep you safest and happiest. Even if it breaks me to do it. No, Amelia said sharply, turning to face him fully for the first time since they'd arrived, something fierce and unexpected flaring in her expression. No, Vincent, I did not spend 6 weeks slowly, carefully, terrifyingly learning to trust you again just to send you back into hiding the first time danger appears. I am angry about a great many things. I am still working through 5 years of grief that I'm not sure will ever fully resolve. But I am done. I am completely done with you making unilateral decisions about my safety without including me in them. If there's a threat, we face it together, whatever that means. I mean it, Vincent. Together or not at all. Something in Vincent's chest, some final knot of fear and self-protective distance he had not even fully realized he was still carrying, loosened at her words. Together, he agreed, his voice rough. Over the following days, while Salvatore's contacts worked quietly to determine exactly what Marcus Riley had learned and who precisely was funding his investigation, the strange, suspended time at the lake house took on an unexpected quality of grace, removed from the careful, incremental rebuilding of their old street, from the watchful eyes of neighbours and the particular pressure of ordinary routine. Vincent and Amelia found themselves, almost despite the danger surrounding them, falling back into a rhythm that felt, for the first time in 5 years, unforced. They cooked together in the enormous kitchen, Leo underfoot, demanding to help with tasks entirely beyond his 4-year-old capabilities, and Vincent found himself laughing, really laughing. The deep, unguarded laugh Amelia had once told a version of Nico Falco she missed more than she could say. More in those few days than he had allowed himself in the entirety of the 5 years before. They walked the shore of the lake in the long summer evenings while Leo chased frogs at the water's edge, and slowly, carefully, without either of them quite naming the shift, began to talk not just about the wreckage of the past, but about the shape of a possible future. Where they might live once the danger passed, whether Leo would prefer a dog or a cat, the particular, impossible, ordinary hopes of 2 people daring, at long last, to imagine a life together again. On the fourth night, after Leo had finally succumbed to sleep following a full day of lakeshore exploration, Vincent and Amelia sat together on the porch steps beneath a sky thick with stars, unobscured by any city light. And Amelia leaned her head against his shoulder, a small, simple gesture that undid something in Vincent's chest more completely than any of the desperate declarations he'd made in the rain 6 weeks earlier. "I'm not fully there yet," she said quietly into the dark. "Forgiveness, I mean. Full trust. I don't know exactly what those things look like yet, after everything. But I want you to know I'm not running from this anymore, Vincent. Whatever's ahead, whatever the Castellanos turn out to want, I'm not sending you away to face it alone, and I'm not pretending anymore that I don't still love you, because I do. I never stopped, even when I thought you were dead, especially then, maybe." Vincent pressed a kiss to the crown of her head, holding her against him beneath the vast, indifferent stars, and felt something in his chest that he had not permitted himself to feel in 5 long years of exile. Hope, unguarded and entire, that whatever storm was still gathering on the horizon, they might, finally, weather it together. The call came on the 6th day, and Vincent took it out on the dock, away from the house, watching the morning mist burn slowly off the still lake water, while Salvatore delivered news that shifted the entire shape of the danger they'd been bracing against. "I found him," Salvatore said. "Marcus Riley. Better still, I found out who's paying him, and Vincent, it's not what either of us assumed." "Tell me." "It's not the Castellano family," Salvatore said. "It's one man within it. Younger son, named Michael Castellano, acting entirely on his own, outside his father's knowledge or sanction. He's not investigating on behalf of the family's interests, Vincent. He's investigating because he wants proof you're alive, so he can bring it to his father as leverage. Proof that he's capable of the kind of intelligence work that would earn him standing within the organization he's spent his whole life feeling overlooked in, being the younger son and all. From what my sources tell me, the Castellano patriarch has no interest whatsoever in reopening old wars. He's old, tired, more concerned with legitimate business interests than reviving a 15-year-old grudge. If Michael brings him proof you're alive, the old man is far more likely to be furious at his son for digging up trouble than inclined to act on it." Relief moved through Vincent's chest, immediate and profound, followed almost instantly by a colder, more calculating awareness. But if Michael goes public with it, before his father can control the information, if he takes it to other families, tries to build his own standing off the discovery independently, then we have an uncontrolled variable with no incentive toward discretion and everything to gain from causing chaos, Salvatore finished grimly. Which is, I think, precisely the risk we need to eliminate before it becomes a genuine problem. Vincent stood on the dock a long moment, working through the calculus of a problem that felt, in some strange way, almost familiar after 5 years of a quieter life. The particular cold clarity required to assess a threat and determine the most direct path to neutralizing it before it could cause harm. "Arrange a meeting," Vincent said finally. "Not through Riley, directly, with Michael Castellano, on my terms, somewhere neutral. I want to understand exactly what he wants and offer him a path to getting it that doesn't require dragging Amelia and my son into a war neither of us actually wants." Vincent, meeting him directly confirms the very thing you've spent 5 years trying to keep hidden. He already suspects it, Vincent said. Riley's been thorough enough that Michael clearly believes the theory is sound, or he wouldn't be spending the money to chase it this hard. The only question left is whether I control how and when that information reaches him, or whether I let him continue digging until he finds it, on terms I have no say over. I'd rather control the terms, Salvatore. I've had enough of other people controlling the terms of my own life. 3 days later, Vincent sat alone at a corner table in a quiet restaurant in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, chosen deliberately for its distance from both Boston and Providence, neutral ground with no history attached to either family, and watched Michael Castellano walk through the door. He was younger than Vincent had expected, perhaps 28, with his father's sharp jaw, but none of the old man's weathered gravity, an eager, hungry look in his eyes that Vincent recognized immediately as the particular ambition of a man who had spent his whole life in a more favoured sibling's shadow. It was a look Vincent understood with an uncomfortable intimacy, having spent 15 years watching his own younger brother wrestle, less successfully, with exactly this same hunger, right up until it had gotten Vincent killed on paper and Dante killed in truth. "Mr. Moretti," Michael said, sliding into the booth across from him, something like triumph flickering across his face at the simple confirmation of Vincent's presence. "I have to admit, I wasn't entirely certain my theory was correct until this very moment." "Now you're certain," Vincent said evenly. "The question is what you intend to do with that certainty." "That depends," Michael said, leaning back with the particular false confidence of a young man trying very hard to project more power than he actually possessed, "on what you're prepared to offer me to keep it quiet." "I'm not offering you money," Vincent said. "You have plenty of that already, being your father's son, and money was never really what you wanted from this investigation in the first place. You wanted proof that you could accomplish something significant on your own, something your father would have to respect." Michael's jaw tightened, the accuracy of the observation clearly landing harder than he'd anticipated. "And what exactly are you offering instead?" "A choice," Vincent said. "You can take this information to your father, present it as your own discovery, and hope he's impressed, rather than furious that you've spent significant resources reopening a war he has no interest in fighting, a war that, I promise you, Michael, he will not thank you for resurrecting, whatever version of respect you're imagining it will earn you. Or you can accept a different kind of proof of your capability. A position, legitimate and lucrative, in one of the businesses I still maintain a controlling interest in, built entirely on your own merit from this point forward, with the understanding that what you've learned about my continued existence stays between the two of us, permanently, and my family remains permanently, completely outside whatever future conflicts your family's business might involve you in." Michael studied him a long moment, the hunger in his expression warring visibly with a calculation Vincent recognized, having made 1,000 similar calculations himself across 15 years of exactly this kind of negotiation. "You're offering me a job to buy my silence. I'm offering you a legitimate path to the respect you're actually looking for," Vincent said. "Your father built an empire on fear and bloodshed that's slowly bleeding out under federal pressure and a changing world that has less and less patience for men like us. I built one too, and I walked away from every piece of it the moment I understood what it was actually costing me. You have a chance, right now, to decide whether you want to spend your life chasing your father's approval through exactly the kind of dangerous games that got my own brother killed, or whether you want something real, built on your own two hands, that no one can ever take from you, the way loyalty in that world can always, eventually, be taken. Michael was quiet a long time, something in his young, hungry face shifting slowly toward a consideration Vincent recognized as genuine. "I'll need to think about it," he said finally. "Take the time you need," Vincent said. "But Michael, know that whatever you decide, I have spent 5 years and everything I once possessed protecting the woman and the son I love from exactly the kind of danger your investigation threatened to reintroduce into their lives. I will not allow that threat to continue, one way or another. I would much rather resolve this as two reasonable men, finding a mutually beneficial path forward. But I want you to understand, clearly, that I am not a man without other options, if this conversation fails to produce one." Something in Vincent's voice, some faint echo of the man who had once commanded absolute fear and absolute loyalty across an entire criminal empire, moved across the table, and Michael Castellano, for the first time since sitting down, looked, briefly, genuinely afraid. "I understand," he said quietly. "I'll call you within the week." He called 4 days later. He would take the job. They returned to Boston in late August, the immediate danger resolved, though Vincent had spent the intervening days, while waiting for Michael Castellano's decision, arranging additional layers of security around Amelia's brownstone that he did not fully explain and she did not fully ask about, both of them settling, without quite naming it, into a shared understanding that some caution would simply be a permanent feature of the life they were building together now. The brownstone 2 doors down sat empty. Vincent had let the lease on the Nico Falco identity lapse entirely, one final piece of the false life shed like old skin. And in its place, after a conversation that took most of one long evening and considerably more courage than either of them expected, Vincent moved his few belongings into the 3rd bedroom of Amelia's house, an arrangement they both understood, without either quite saying it aloud yet, to be temporary in one direction only. "I'm not ready to share a bedroom," Amelia had said, flushed and a little embarrassed even raising the topic. "But I don't want you 2 doors down anymore either. I want you close. I want Leo to wake up and know you're actually here, not just visiting." "Whatever pace you need," Vincent had said, and meant it entirely, having learned across 5 years of exile and 6 transformative weeks since the truth broke open, that patience was not a virtue he'd once possessed by nature, but one he had built, brick by brick, out of the wreckage of everything he'd lost. Leo, for his part, greeted the new arrangement with the uncomplicated delight of a child for whom having his father permanently under the same roof represented an unambiguous good, entirely unburdened by the complicated adult architecture of trust and healing still being carefully constructed around him. "Now you can read me stories every single night," he informed Vincent with great satisfaction, the first evening back in the brownstone, already deep in negotiations over exactly which dinosaur-themed book would receive the honour of that night's bedtime reading. "Not just Tuesdays." "Every single night," Vincent confirmed, his voice thick, and settled onto the edge of his son's bed, to read a book about a Tyrannosaurus Rex's search for friendship with a passion and commitment that would have astonished the men who'd once feared him across a dozen cities. September brought the ordinary rhythms of a new preschool year, Leo starting a proper program 3 mornings a week that left Amelia's small design studio, tucked into the front room of the brownstone, blessedly quiet for stretches at a time. And Vincent found himself, in those quiet mornings, discovering an unexpected purpose in helping her business grow, not through the shadow world resources and intimidation that had once characterized every deal he'd ever made, but through simple, legitimate investment and the patient, careful cultivation of a genuinely talented designer's reputation. "You don't have to do this," Amelia told him one morning in mid-September, looking over the plans for the small commercial studio space he'd quietly helped her secure a lease on, 3 times the size of her current cramped front room. "I built this business alone. I can keep building it alone." "I know you can," Vincent said. "You've proven, more thoroughly than anyone I've ever known, exactly how much you're capable of building alone." "I'm not offering to do this instead of you, Amelia. I'm asking if you'll let me do it alongside you. There's a difference. And I understand if the distinction still feels difficult to trust, given everything. But I would like the chance to build something with you now, instead of only ever rebuilding what I broke." Amelia studied the lease documents a long moment, something soft moving across her face. "Okay," she said finally. "Alongside me. I can work with that." It was on a golden October afternoon, 6 weeks after their return to Boston, that Vincent found himself standing again at the little park at the end of the street, pushing his son on the same rusted swing set where, months earlier, a 4-year-old's devastating honesty had cracked open 5 years of careful silence, watching Amelia approach across the grass with 2 coffees and a look on her face he had learned, across these tender, difficult, healing months, to recognize as something like peace. "I've been thinking," she said, settling onto the low stone wall beside him, close enough now that the distance she'd once carefully maintained had entirely dissolved. "About everything. About the wedding that never happened, and the 5 years, and everything since. And I think I'm ready, Vincent." His heart stuttered. "Ready for what?" "To stop being angry," Amelia said, and though her eyes were wet, her voice was steady in a way it had not been steady since the night the truth first broke open. "Not because the anger wasn't justified. It was, every bit of it, and I don't think it's fully gone, not entirely. Maybe it never will be completely. But I've spent 6 months watching you rebuild every single thing you broke, brick by brick, with more patience and more honesty than I ever thought I'd be given the chance to witness. I've watched you become the father Leo deserves, and I've watched myself, slowly, becoming the woman I was before grief hollowed something out of me that I thought was gone for good. And I think I'm ready to stop grieving the wedding we never had and start planning the one we might still get to have." Vincent turned to her fully, his hands trembling in a way 5 years of dangerous, controlled life had never once managed to provoke, and understood, watching her face in the gold October light, that he had been given, impossibly, undeservedly, exactly the thing he had spent 5 years of exile believing he'd forfeited forever. "Amelia Hart," he said, his voice breaking entirely, "will you marry me? Again, properly this time, with every single truth already spoken between us before we ever stand at that altar?" "Yes," Amelia said, laughing and crying at once, the particular joyful, healing sound that Vincent understood, watching her, to be the sound of 5 years of grief finally, fully, beginning to resolve into something like hope. "Yes, Vincent, 1,000 times yes. Behind them, Leo, having abandoned the swing entirely to investigate this sudden outbreak of parental emotion, tugged at Vincent's sleeve with the particular urgent curiosity of a 4-year-old determined not to be left out of important news. "Are you guys getting married?" he demanded. "For real this time? Can I be the ring guy?" "Ring bearer," Amelia corrected, laughing through her tears, pulling her son into the embrace that had, months ago, seemed permanently, impossibly out of reach for the third member of their small, hard-won family. "Yes, baby, we're getting married. For real this time." "Good," Leo said, with enormous satisfaction, snuggling into the embrace of both his parents at once, entirely unaware of the enormous distance they had travelled to arrive together at this single golden autumn afternoon. "I want dinosaurs at the wedding." Vincent laughed, really laughed, the deep, unguarded laugh that belonged entirely to this new life he had fought 5 years and lost nearly everything to earn, and held his family close in the fading gold light, and understood, with a certainty that settled into his chest like a second heartbeat, that whatever else the future held, he would never again let a single day pass without telling them both, in every way he knew how, exactly how much they meant to him. Even as the wedding plans took shape through the crisp days of late autumn, a small, private ceremony this time, nothing like the grand affair originally planned 5 years earlier, just the people who mattered most gathered in the small chapel 2 blocks from the brownstone. Vincent found himself wrestling in the quiet hours after Amelia and Leo had gone to sleep, with a grief he had not yet found a way to properly name or release. Dante. His brother's betrayal had nearly cost Vincent everything, and yet the grief of losing him, first to the choice that had shattered their family, then finally, permanently, to Sabatini's retribution 18 months ago, remained a wound that refused to close cleanly alongside all the others that had, slowly, begun to heal. "You're somewhere else tonight," Amelia observed one November evening, finding him standing at the window of their bedroom. Their bedroom now, the careful separate rooms arrangement having dissolved sometime in October into something neither of them had needed to formally announce, simply understood and welcomed by both. Staring out at the first snow dusting the quiet street below. "I was thinking about Dante," Vincent admitted, and felt, even now, some old instinct to deflect, to protect her from the messier, less resolved corners of his grief. War briefly with the promise he'd made never to hide anything from her again. Amelia came to stand beside him at the window, slipping her hand into his. "Tell me," she said simply. "I hated him. For a long time," Vincent said slowly. "For what he did that night. For every day of those 5 years I spent unable to hold you or Leo, because of a debt he hid from me for years before it finally cost us everything. And then he died trying, in his broken way, to protect the very people he'd endangered. And I found I couldn't simply hate him anymore, not entirely. And I don't know what to do with a grief that's tangled up with that much anger and that much love, all knotted together in a way I can't seem to separate out into anything simple." "You don't have to separate it," Amelia said gently. "Grief for someone who hurt you badly doesn't have to resolve into something clean, Vincent. I spent 5 years grieving a man I thought had simply abandoned me, and even now, even with you standing right here alive. I still sometimes grieve that version of events, the version where you really did just leave without a word, because that grief was real too, even though it turned out not to be based on the truth. Grief doesn't always care whether it's justified. Sometimes it just is what it is, and the only thing to do is let it be there without demanding it resolve into something tidier. Vincent turned to look at her, something in his chest loosening at the particular gentle wisdom she offered, earned the hardest way possible across 5 brutal years of her own unresolved mourning. When did you get so wise about grief? When I had 5 years and a small child to keep alive while I worked through my own, Amelia said, with a small, wry smile that held both old pain and hard-won peace in equal measure. It's not a class I would have chosen to take, but I learned a lot in it, whether I wanted to or not. I want to do something, Vincent said slowly, an idea forming as he spoke. For Dante. Not to excuse what he did. Nothing excuses it, and I don't want to pretend otherwise, especially not to Leo when he's old enough to understand the full history. But something to acknowledge that in the end, whatever else he was, he tried to make it right, in the only way circumstances left available to him. What did you have in mind? There's a scholarship fund, Vincent said, that Salvatore's been helping me establish for young people in Providence who grew up the way Dante and I did, in families entangled in that world, trying to find a legitimate way out before it's too late. I'd like to name it after him. Not to celebrate what he did, to honour the fact that even a man who made a catastrophic, unforgivable mistake can still, in the end, choose to try to make it right, even if it costs him everything. Amelia was quiet a moment, considering this with the same careful thoughtfulness she brought to every difficult question in their still healing life together. I think that's a beautiful way to hold both truths at once, she said finally, that he hurt us terribly, and that he also, in the end, loved you enough to try to fix it. Both things can be true, Vincent. I've learned that about almost everything in my life this past year. They stood together at the window a long while, watching the snow fall soft and silent over the quiet street, and Vincent felt, for the first time since Dante's death 18 months earlier, something in his chest that was not quite peace, but was perhaps the very beginning of it. The recognition that grief, held honestly and without demand for tidy resolution, could coexist alongside the deep, hard-won joy of the family he had, against every reasonable expectation, been given the chance to rebuild. Downstairs, faintly, they could hear Leo's small feet padding across his bedroom floor, some late-night mission involving almost certainly a forbidden nighttime raid on his sizable dinosaur collection. And Amelia laughed softly, the sound warm in the quiet room. I should go settle him, she said, before he wakes the whole house negotiating with a stegosaurus. I'll come with you, Vincent said, and they went together, hand in hand, down the hallway toward their son's room. Two people who had lost each other completely, and found their way, against every reasonable expectation, back to a life that held both unresolved grief and unguarded joy in the same tender, complicated, entirely human embrace. The chapel was small, exactly as Amelia had wanted, tucked on a quiet side street 2 blocks from the brownstone, its stone walls softened by December light filtering through narrow stained-glass windows in patterns of gold and blue across the worn wooden pews. There were no crowds this time, No elaborate arrangements, no 500 guests representing the careful political architecture of a criminal empire Vincent had long since dismantled. There was Claire, radiant with tears she made no effort to hide, standing as Amelia's only attendant. There was Salvatore, grey-haired and gruff and unexpectedly emotional, standing as Vincent's witness, the old lawyer having spent 3 generations of Moretti history, now, finally, at long last, presiding over an ending that didn't involve tragedy. And there was Leo, 5 years old now, having had his birthday just 2 weeks earlier, dressed in a small navy suit that he had negotiated fiercely to accessorize with a single, discreet dinosaur pin fastened to his lapel, walking with tremendous, solemn ceremony down the short aisle, carrying the rings on a small velvet cushion he had practiced with for 2 full weeks, determined not to drop them. Vincent stood at the altar and watched his son approach with an expression of such fierce concentration that he had to press his knuckles briefly against his mouth to keep from laughing and crying at once. And then the small chapel doors opened again, and Amelia appeared in the doorway, and every other thought in Vincent's mind simply ceased to exist. She wore ivory, not the elaborate original wedding gown that had hung, he knew, still preserved in the back of her closet for 5 years, a relic of grief she'd never quite been able to discard, but something simpler, softer, a dress she had chosen herself for this second, truer beginning. And she walked down the short aisle toward him, with tears already tracking down her face, and Vincent felt his own eyes burn with an emotion too large for a single word to contain. "You look," he said, when she reached him, his voice breaking entirely on the simple words, "exactly like everything I spent 5 years afraid I'd never see again." "I'm here," Amelia said, taking his hands, her voice thick with tears and laughter both. "I'm here, Vincent. We're both here. Finally." The ceremony itself was brief, simple, entirely unlike the elaborate affair that had been planned 5 years earlier. No string quartet, no towering floral arrangements, no careful diplomatic seating chart designed to keep rival families from bloodshed at the reception. Just the officiant's quiet words, the exchange of rings Leo delivered with triumphant, careful precision, and vows that Vincent had rewritten entirely from the ones he'd once prepared 5 years earlier. Vows that spoke honestly, in front of everyone gathered, of everything that had broken and everything that had, against all reasonable expectation, been rebuilt. 5 years ago, Vincent said, his voice steady despite the tears he made no effort to hide, "I made you a promise I couldn't keep, not because I stopped loving you, but because loving you meant, I believed, that I had to disappear entirely from your life to keep you safe. I was wrong about many things in that choice, Amelia, and I have spent every day since trying to make right what I broke. But I was never wrong about one thing, that you are, and have always been, the truest home I have ever known. Today, I don't just promise to love you, I promise to never again choose silence over honesty, distance over presence, protection over partnership. Whatever storms come for us, and I know now that some inevitably will, I promise to face them beside you, not instead of you, for the rest of our lives." Amelia's vows, when she spoke them, were quieter, simpler, but no less devastating in their honesty. "I spent 5 years grieving a man I thought had abandoned me," she said, And I built in that grief a strength I never knew I possessed, and a son who is the very best of both of us. I am not the same woman who stood in a wedding dress 5 years ago, waiting for a groom who never came. I am someone stronger, someone who has learned that love, real love, has to be built on complete honesty, or it isn't love at all, just a beautiful lie waiting to shatter. Vincent, I choose you today, not despite everything we've survived, but because of what surviving it taught us both. I love you. I have never, not for one single day of those 5 years, truly stopped. When the officiant finally pronounced them married, the small chapel erupted, not into the polite, restrained applause of a grand society wedding, but into something warmer, rawer, Claire sobbing openly, Salvatore clearing his throat with suspicious frequency, and Leo, unable to contain himself a moment longer, launching himself at his parents' legs with a triumphant shout of, "Now can we go get pizza?" that broke the solemnity of the moment into helpless, joyful laughter. Outside the chapel, snow had begun to fall in soft, lazy flakes, dusting the quiet street in white, and Vincent Moretti stood on the chapel steps with his wife. His wife, finally, truly, after 5 years of exile and grief and a slow, hard-won rebuilding, and his son between them, and felt, for the first time in a life defined almost entirely by danger and loss and the careful architecture of survival, something he had genuinely, in his darkest years of exile, believed he would never be permitted to feel again. Peace. Complete, unguarded, undeserved, and entirely, finally, his. 2 years passed, and then 2 more, and the extraordinary, dangerous, romantic story of Vincent Moretti's return from the dead slowly, gradually, became simply the fabric of an ordinary life, which was, Vincent had come to understand, the entire point of everything he'd fought for. Amelia's design studio had grown into a small but genuinely respected firm. Her work featured now in regional magazines, her client list expanding steadily through word of mouth and genuine talent, rather than any of Vincent's old-world influence, which she had made abundantly firmly clear she wanted no part of, ever, in the honest life they were building together. Vincent, for his part, had found unexpected purpose in the scholarship foundation established in Dante's name, which had grown, over 4 years, into a genuine force, helping dozens of young people across Providence and Boston find legitimate paths away from the world that had once claimed both Moretti brothers. Leo was 9 now, tall for his age, still dinosaur-obsessed, though the specific fascination had evolved into a broader passion for paleontology that had him declaring, with great seriousness, his intention to become the world's best fossil scientist by the time he reached double digits. He had his father's dark, intense eyes, and his mother's easy, generous warmth, and on the rare occasions Vincent allowed himself to think about the 5 years he'd missed, he found the grief had softened, over time, into something closer to gratitude for every single day he'd been given since. There was a new addition to the family now, too, Sophia, 3 years old, a whirlwind of dark curls and fierce, imperious opinions, who had, from the moment of her birth, wrapped both her parents and her considerably older brother around her small, determined finger, with an ease that made Vincent laugh sometimes at the particular justice of a man who had once commanded absolute fear across an entire criminal empire, finding himself utterly, helplessly, outmaneuvered by a toddler's tantrum over the wrong colour cup. "She gets that stubbornness from you, Amelia informed him regularly, watching Sophia stage a full protest against bedtime with the tactical determination of a general planning a siege. "Don't even try to deny it." "I have no idea what you're talking about," Vincent would reply, entirely straight-faced, and Amelia would laugh and roll her eyes and love him. In that moment, and every moment since their small chapel wedding, with a completeness she had once believed grief had permanently foreclosed to her. They had settled, in the end, not in the brownstone where the truth had finally broken open, nor in any of the grand properties Vincent's old life might once have afforded, but in a modest, comfortable house in a quiet Boston suburb, close enough to Claire's family and to Amelia's growing client base, far enough from the particular ghosts of the old neighbourhood that both of them had, over the years, found it easier to build new memories rather than constantly walk past the old ones. On a warm evening in late spring, 4 years after their second wedding, Vincent stood at the grill in their small backyard, Leo beside him, earnestly explaining in exhaustive 9-year-old detail the precise geological era various dinosaur species had inhabited, while Sophia chased fireflies across the lawn, with Amelia trailing behind her, laughing, catching her daughter up into a spinning embrace that sent the little girl into peals of delighted shrieking. Vincent watched them, his family, whole and safe and utterly, gloriously ordinary in a way he had once believed, across 15 brutal years of empire and warfare, would never be available to a man like him, and felt the particular profound gratitude of someone who has been given, against every reasonable expectation, a second chance he does not, for one single day, take for granted. "You're staring again," Amelia said, coming to stand beside him at the grill, Sophia now perched on her hip, sleepy and sun-warmed after her firefly hunt. "You do that a lot, you know. Just stop and look at us, like you can't quite believe we're real." "I can't," Vincent admitted, pressing a kiss to her temple, then to Sophia's dark curls, watching Leo continue his enthusiastic dinosaur lecture to an audience of exactly no one, entirely undeterred. "Some mornings I still wake up half expecting to find it was all a dream, that I'm still in exile somewhere, watching all of this from a distance I'll never be permitted to close." "Well," Amelia said, leaning into him, warm and solid and entirely, permanently present, "you're not. This is real, Vincent. We're real. And we're not going anywhere." Later that night, once both children had finally, reluctantly surrendered to sleep, Vincent stood at the window of their bedroom, watching the last light fade over the quiet suburban street, and thought, as he did still on certain nights, of the man he had been on the eve of his first wedding, so certain that love alone could shield the people he cherished from the dangers of the world he'd been born into, so utterly unprepared for the betrayal that would cost him 5 years and nearly everything he loved. He thought of Dante, gone now nearly 6 years, and felt the old grief move through him. Softer now, worn smooth by time, the way grief eventually is, if you let it be held, rather than demanding it resolve. He thought of the empire he'd walked away from, piece by piece, and felt no regret at all for its absence, only a distant, faintly surreal sense that it had belonged to a different man entirely, a man he had needed to fully release in order to become the husband and father standing in this quiet bedroom now. "Are you coming to bed?" Amelia called softly from behind him, already settled beneath the covers, watching him with the particular warm patience she still, after everything, extended to whatever quiet reflection occasionally claimed him in these still evening hours. "Coming," Vincent said, and crossed the room to her and climbed into the bed they had built together, in the life they had built together, out of the wreckage of everything that had once nearly destroyed them both. It was Leo, at 11, who found the letter, not by accident, but because Vincent had, on his 12th birthday, made a deliberate choice to finally, fully share with his son the complete history that 4-year-old Leo's innocent question had first begun to crack open years earlier. They sat together in Vincent's small home office, father and son, the letter Vincent had written years ago, during the long, uncertain days at the lake house, in case anything had gone wrong with the Castellano situation, in case he had needed, once again, to disappear, or worse, resting on the desk between them. "I wrote this the summer everything came out," Vincent explained, watching his son's face carefully, gauging how much of this weighted history an 11-year-old, however precocious, was truly ready to hold. "In case something happened to me, before I had the chance to tell you everything myself, in my own words, when you were old enough to understand it fully. I want you to read it, Leo. Not because anything happened. I'm right here, and I intend to stay right here for a very long time yet. But because I think you deserve the complete truth now, in a form more permanent than a conversation, something you can return to whenever you need it." Leo read the letter slowly, his young face working through emotions Vincent recognized with an ache, confusion, then a kind of dawning understanding, then something that looked unmistakably like grief for an uncle he had never known, a grief entirely appropriate to a story this complicated, this fully human in its mixture of love and betrayal and desperate, imperfect protection. "Uncle Dante loved you," Leo said finally, looking up from the letter, "even though what he did was really, really wrong." "Both things are true," Vincent said quietly, echoing the wisdom Amelia had offered him years earlier in a snow-dusted bedroom window, grief tangled with love in a knot neither of them had ever fully needed to untangle. "He made a catastrophic mistake that cost our family 5 years of pain none of us deserved. And in the end, he loved me enough to try to fix it, even though it cost him his life. I don't want you to think you have to choose between being angry at what he did and understanding that he was still, in his own broken way, someone who loved this family. Grief is rarely simple, Leo. The people we lose are rarely only one thing." "Is that why you started the scholarship thing?" Leo asked. "The one that helps kids like you and him grew up to be?" "Exactly why," Vincent confirmed. "I couldn't save Dante. I couldn't undo what happened. But I could try to make sure other young people, growing up in circumstances like ours, have a real path away from the kind of choices that destroyed him, before it's too late for them, the way it was too late for him." Leo was quiet a long moment, turning the letter over in his hands, and then asked the question Vincent had, in some deep, unspoken way, been waiting years for his son to eventually pose. "Do you ever miss it? Being—" he hesitated over the word, "the boss, having all that power?" Vincent considered the question with the full seriousness it deserved, unwilling, as always, to offer his son anything less than complete honesty. "I miss certain things," he admitted. "The particular satisfaction of solving a difficult problem, sometimes. The loyalty of men I trusted, before Dante's betrayal taught me how conditional that loyalty could be. But no, Leo, I do not miss the power itself. Power like that costs everything, eventually. It cost me 5 years with your mother. It cost me the chance to hold you as a newborn, to hear your first words, to watch your first steps. It cost your Uncle Dante his life, in the end. I would trade every single piece of that old life, every dollar, every ounce of fear men once held for my name, for one more ordinary Tuesday evening with you and your mother and your sister, doing nothing more remarkable than eating dinner together at our own kitchen table. That's not a difficult trade for me to make, even now. It never has been. Leo set the letter down carefully on the desk and, in a gesture that undid Vincent entirely, crossed the small space between them and hugged his father with the fierce, uncomplicated love of a child who had, across 11 years, come to understand exactly how hard-won and precious this ordinary family life truly was. "I'm really glad you came back," Leo said, muffled against his father's shoulder. "Even though everything that happened was really messed up, I'm glad you're my dad. For real, not just Nico." "So am I," Vincent said, his voice breaking, holding his son close in the quiet office, sunlight slanting warm through the window, the old letter resting on the desk beside them like a closed chapter, finally, properly laid to rest. "More than you will ever fully know, Leo. So am I." On a warm September evening, exactly 10 years after the storm-lashed night that had cracked 5 years of silence open, Vincent Moretti stood on the back porch of the home he shared with his family, watching the sun set gold and orange over the quiet suburban street, and felt the particular, complete peace of a man who has, against every reasonable expectation, been given everything he once believed he'd forfeited entirely. Leo, now 15, sat at the porch table, working through a paleontology textbook with the same fierce dedication he'd once brought to bedtime dinosaur negotiations, having declared his intention to study at Boston University's Earth Sciences program the moment he was old enough to apply. A plan Vincent supported with a pride so complete it occasionally still caught him unprepared. This simple, ordinary gift of watching his son grow into exactly the person he was meant to become. Sophia, 9 now, practiced cartwheels across the back lawn with the same fierce, uncomplicated determination she'd brought to every pursuit since infancy, occasionally calling out for her father's assessment of her form with the particular confidence of a child who had never once doubted her parents' complete devotion. Amelia came out onto the porch carrying 2 glasses of wine, settling into the chair beside him, watching their children with the same soft, grateful expression Vincent had come to recognize as the particular quiet joy of 2 people who had rebuilt a life from genuine ruin and never, not for a single day since, taken the result for granted. "10 years," she said quietly, handing him his glass. 10 years since that storm." 10 years, Vincent agreed, and reached over to take her hand, the familiar grounding weight of her fingers laced through his, a gesture that had, across a decade, become as essential to him as breathing itself. "Do you ever think about it?" Amelia asked. "That night, everything before it, the whole story of how we got here?" "Every single day," Vincent admitted. "Not with the pain it once carried. That's mostly healed now, or healed as much as anything like that ever fully heals. But I think about it because I never want to forget how close we came to losing all of this. how close I came to letting fear keep me in exile forever, watching you both from a careful, cowardly distance, rather than risking everything to actually come home. You weren't a coward, Amelia said firmly, the particular fierce loyalty she still, after everything, extended to him without hesitation. You made an impossible choice under impossible circumstances, and when you finally had the chance to make it right, you took it, completely, without holding anything back. That's not cowardice, Vincent. That's the bravest thing I've ever watched anyone do. Vincent looked at his wife in the fading gold light, 10 years of rebuilt trust and hard-won peace evident in every line of her face, and felt the same overwhelming gratitude that had defined every single day of this second chance he had been given. "I used to think," he said slowly, "that love and power were the same thing. That protecting the people I cherished meant controlling every variable, eliminating every risk, standing between them and the world with absolute, unyielding force. It took losing everything. You, Leo, 5 years of a life I can never get back, to understand that real love isn't about control at all. It's about trust. It's about choosing honesty over protection, even when honesty is terrifying. It's about showing up, imperfectly, again and again, and trusting the people you love to help you carry what you can't carry alone." "That's a very wise thing for a former mafia boss to say," Amelia said, with the particular gentle teasing that had, across a decade, become one of Vincent's favourite sounds in the entire world. "I had an excellent teacher," Vincent said, lifting her hand to press a kiss against her knuckles. "The bravest, most resilient woman I have ever known, who somehow found it in herself to forgive a man who let her grieve him for 5 entire years, and who taught me, patiently, across a decade since, exactly what real partnership actually looks like." Across the lawn, Sophia executed a particularly impressive cartwheel and demanded, with great insistence, that both her parents witness an immediate encore. And Leo looked up from his textbook long enough to offer his sister a solemn, judicial assessment of her form that sent her into peals of indignant, delighted protest. And Vincent Moretti sat on his back porch in the fading gold light of a warm September evening, surrounded by everything he had once believed, across 5 brutal years of exile, he would never be permitted to hold again, and felt, in his chest, the particular, complete peace of a man who has finally, fully, come home. "I love you," he said to Amelia, the words as true and as necessary now as they had been on the rain-soaked night 10 years earlier when he'd knelt in the flooded street outside her door and told her his heart had never once left her. "I will love you for every single day I have left, and I will spend every one of them grateful that you let me come home." "I love you too," Amelia said, leaning into him, watching their children play in the golden evening light. 10 years of grief and rebuilding and hard-won joy settling into something that finally, completely, felt like peace. "Welcome home, Vincent. You're not going anywhere, ever again." "Never again," Vincent promised, and meant it with everything he had left to give. Watching the sun set gold over the family, he had fought a war in the shadows for 5 long years to earn the right to hold, and understood, with a certainty that had taken a decade of grief and rebuilding to fully believe, that some storms, however devastating, could still, in the end, lead a broken man all the way home.